Chapter 1370. Bastard. Who can tell me what's going on? The female mayor stared in horror at the plants that were wreaking havoc in the town and couldn't help but scream. She wasn't the only one. Almost all the residents in the town who were still alive were stunned by the unbelievable disaster in front of them. In less than a minute, all kinds of huge plants that they had never seen before rose from the ground and forcibly changed the surrounding environment and even the terrain. At this moment, the entire town seemed to be situated in the middle of a dense forest. Whether it was the vines that could crush a house or the flowers that looked beautiful but actually devoured people without spitting out the bones, they were all frantically hunting down the remaining survivors. Unable to use magic to directly interfere with the movements of the magic plants, they relied entirely on the most primitive plant instinct to do their best to absorb nutrients so that they could become stronger and stronger before they died. This was an underground world without the illumination of the stars, so all the surface plants that needed to photosynthesize were doomed to not live long. Even the magic plants that relied on absorbing energy to maintain their growth were no exception. In order to prolong their destined short lifespan, every plant hunted and killed their prey crazily, transforming them into nutrients and energy to store. Mayam, let's run away quickly. This town is finished. The young servant kept retreating incoherently, his eyes full of horror. As an underground world without daylight, the most common plants here were moss and mushrooms. They had never seen such destructive vines and cannibal flowers that could swallow a living person in one bite. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that he was in such a state. However, the female mayor, who had a strong desire to possess and rule, obviously couldn't tolerate the foundation that she had painstakingly built for decades being destroyed just like that. She grabbed the male servant, opened her mouth, revealed her sharp mandibles, and bit off his throat, greedily sucking the scorching blood. About a minute later, she threw the completely dead body aside. While licking the remaining blood at the corner of her mouth, she ordered the guards beside her, who were also her biological daughters, "Go, gather your brothers and sisters immediately. No matter who is behind this, I will make him pay the price of blood." "As you wish, mother." The eldest woman hurriedly bent down and bowed deeply. As the eldest daughter, she knew better than the siblings who were born later how terrifying her mother was. Anyone who dared to go against her would die a horrible death without mercy. Not long after, hundreds of fully armed guards consisting of young men and women were quickly gathered. There is no need to ask to know that these were the descendants of the female mayor over the years. They were his sons, daughters, and even grandchildren, with the bloodline connection and unparalleled deterrence. The mayor was the supreme queen of this group. It could even be said that she was the queen of the swarm. Children, I know that all of you are very scared right now and are eager to leave this dangerous town where you could lose your lives at any time. But the problem is that once we leave our nest, we will lose our foundation and become a group of homeless wanderers. Think about it. How have we dealt with the wanderers over the years? The female mayor asked loudly, forcing herself to be calm. Mother is right. If we escape from here, what awaits us next will be endless suffering and death. Even if it is for ourselves and our descendants, we must find the culprit and restore everything to its original state. The eldest daughter took the initiative to stand up and help. But unfortunately, these encouraging words did not resonate with these so-called relatives. The reason was very simple. Their previous relationship was not maintained by affection, but by a series of complicated things such as power, strength, and bloodline. So what this group of silent people yearned for the most was for the female tyrant to die quickly so that they could regain their freedom. The female mayor undoubtedly noticed the subtle emotions and immediately became somewhat furious. Her whole body emitted a chilling aura. But before she could vent her accumulated anger, a familiar voice suddenly sounded behind her. Hello, dear madam. Why, you haven't left yet. It's you." The female mayor turned around abruptly and saw two boys who looked almost identical walking out of the dilapidated house. "That's right. You've already guessed it, haven't you?" Luke nodded with a smile, his face full of ridicule. After all, there were only two outsiders in the town during this period of time. So even if one used their buts to think, they would know that these two were the most suspicious. Why? Why are you doing this? The female mayor asked loudly, clenching her fists tightly. Luke responded without hesitation. Of course, it's to take revenge on your disgusting desires and behavior. Do you know? Every time you appear in front of me with a smile, I have a strong desire to vomit. But you feel good about yourself and even think that you are very charming, enough to make most of the opposite sex secrete excessive hormones. You can read my thoughts. The female mayor's voice suddenly rose by at least an octave. Congratulations, you've guessed correctly. In fact, I've only awakened this ability not long ago, and I can't control it very well. But it's enough to deal with someone like you who has no mental protection. Luke grinned evilly. In that case, you've been lying to me all this time, treating me like a fool. Before the female mayor could finish her words, the boy standing at the side couldn't help but remind her, "Damn it. Hurry up and get rid of your trouble. I can already feel the shadow guard approaching us. Don't worry, it won't take long." Luke shrugged nonchalantly and put on an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry. Although I still want to play with you for a while, time doesn't allow it. So goodbye, madam. I hope you won't suffer a mental breakdown in the process of dying." As the last word escaped his mouth, Luke instantly took a dozen steps back. The next second, boom, a twisted black tree rose from the ground and secreted a black-red mucus from its branches. The mucus enveloped all the Eniots, including the mayor. No matter how hard they struggled, it was to no avail. Chapter 1371. What an unbelievable scene. I didn't expect you to have some artistic cells. The boy raised his head and looked at the pitiful creatures that were struggling in the gum before slowly suffocating to death. His tone was full of admiration. This was because the pain and suffering these pitiful creatures suffered before their deaths had been perfectly preserved without missing a single word. Especially those ferocious and terrifying faces. No matter how brave a person was, they would probably have nightmares at night. Art. Luke smiled contemptuously. Please don't mention the word art in front of me. In my knowledge, the so-called art is actually a tool used to build barriers between classes. It is a barrier that the few who hold power and wealth deliberately set up to prevent the majority of the people at the bottom from easily getting close to them. Art itself is meaningless. It is only because people with ulterior motives think it has value that it is given value. What is real art? No one could give an accurate answer or definition. After all, everyone had different preferences and personalities. Naturally, there would be differences in their views on things. Things that were regarded as unattainable by some people might be complete garbage in the eyes of others. Therefore, all those priceless paintings, sculptures, architecture, poems, music, and so on, without exception, would go through a series of excessive flattery and hype, causing most people to believe that they were truly priceless treasures. As the saying goes, a lie told 1,000 times is the truth. When 80 to 90% of the people began to believe, priceless works of art would naturally be born. And those who were rich and in power would use these things to restrict the aesthetics of the people at the bottom, and even form a specialized profession or discipline to further widen the gap between classes. It must be known that those who had enough time and money to learn these useless things were definitely not the people at the bottom who had to face the pressure of living and even survival every day. Slowly, appreciation and taste of art became the patent of the upper class and became a symbol of elegance and status. As for the people at the bottom who didn't know anything, other than looking at art with envy and worship, they could only listen to the explanations given by the so-called artists. Ah, I like your bitter sarcasm. That's right. Art is a kind of visual or auditory self-hypnosis. In fact, when most people come into contact with art for the first time, they are essentially being forcibly instilled with another kind of ideology, or called brainwashing. Only those few things that could resonate with all intelligent life were worthy of being called true art. For example, the corpses hanging on the branches. It was believed that every spellcaster who had studied the topic of life and death in depth would be attracted to them. This is because the final boundary between life and death is perfectly preserved in this resin. The boy laughed out loud as he spoke his thoughts. Contempt for authority, contempt for tradition, contempt for life. He despised all the rules of the universe. There was no doubt that the similarities between the two were much higher than they thought. Just as the entire town was reduced to ruins and a large number of magical plants stopped growing, a dark force suddenly descended from the sky, completely enveloping the surroundings. In less than a minute, a few familiar figures appeared out of thin air. They were the shadow guards that he had saved not long ago. "I finally caught you." The leader grinned with joy. In his eyes, the two boys were destined to become his bargaining chips in exchange for power with the Parliament. Unfortunately, there was no sign of panic on the faces of the two boys, especially Luke, whose eyes flashed with a hint of mockery. He asked without turning his head, "What do you say? Should we retreat immediately, or should we give them a gift first?" "Up to you, but don't go overboard. Be careful of the force field's backlash." The boy reminded him nonchalantly. Since the town was still within the strong range of the Earth's nuclear force field, he was not very worried that the shadow guards would dare to make any big moves. "Since that's the case, let's start with the appetizer." As soon as he finished speaking, the magical plants that seemed to have fallen into a dormant state suddenly came to life again. However, this time, it was clearly different from the aimless attacks from before, especially those gorgeous man-eating flowers. Not only did they open their mouths full of sharp teeth and bite wildly, but they also spat out gray seeds from their petals. Every time the seeds collided with a physical object, it would trigger a violent explosion and energy shock. One of the shadow guards was not paying attention and was almost blown to pieces by the thousands of seeds. He retreated a few hundred meters in a sorry state before barely escaping. "Bastard! How dare you?" Shocked and angry, the unlucky fellow quickly used the unknown black substance around him to repair his body. If it were not for the force field that prevented him from using large-scale killing methods, he would definitely teach this reckless brat a lesson. "Shut up. Don't embarrass the shadow guards." The leader glared fiercely at the unlucky fellow. The latter did not even retort and immediately lowered his head. His eyes were filled with anger, unwillingness, and resentment. However, the leader clearly did not have the time to care about the psychological activities of his subordinates. He narrowed his eyes and sized up the two boys. After a full minute, he said tentatively, "Perhaps we can talk. What do you think?" "Talk? What do you want to talk about?" Luke asked curiously. "I believe you should know very well that we in our civilization do not have much malice toward the two of you. Instead of a meaningless chase and confrontation like this, why don't we work together? I guarantee with my own identity and reputation that the Parliament will not do anything excessive to the two of you, nor will we restrict your freedom." The leader of the Shadow Guards very sincerely offered reconciliation terms. This was because he did not have the confidence to bring the two boys back alive in this environment where their strength was greatly limited. Moreover, he had received bad news not long ago. The Parliament did not abide by the agreement and allowed a large-scale expeditionary army to invade this world in advance. If they could even go against the agreement that they had agreed on, it would not be a big deal to go against it again. Because of that item, the Shadow Guards would not be a match for the Parliament at all if a direct conflict broke out. That was why he hoped to have an external ally. Chapter 1372. Join forces. A playful smile appeared on Luke's face. He turned his head and looked at his brother. This was because he felt that the reason why the other party proposed such a condition was most likely because he didn't know that the fellow who also belonged to the Shadow Guards had already been dismembered and studied several times from the inside out. Right now, he was imprisoned in a sealed container. "That's right. I believe you should know that the main power of the Dalant civilization is concentrated in the hands of the Parliament. This situation has been going on for thousands of years, and it has even become a kind of traditional convention. But in fact, earlier on, there were two sets of parallel power systems. The Parliament was only a subsidiary organization responsible for managing the lower-class people, and we are the ones who truly control the power. When he said these words, the Shadow Guard leader's face showed strong unwillingness and resentment, especially his two eyes, which were empty and lifeless, as if he had fallen into the ancient memories of the past. So, you want to use the two of us to return to the center of power, or at least the periphery of the center of power, and try to make a comeback? The boy took the initiative to stand out and take over the topic. He could feel the burning desire in the other party's heart. This was definitely not a trap or a deceitful tactic, but a strong dissatisfaction with the Parliament. Although he didn't understand what differences, contradictions, or problems left behind by the history of the Dalent people, it didn't stop him from using this to achieve his own unspeakable goals. The leader of the Shadow Guards nodded. That's right. Maybe you don't know, but the people in the Parliament have secretly established a research center, and they're trying to figure out the secret of the dark blue liquid in the crystal day and night. As far as I know, they have successfully weaponized it and intend to use it against the two of you. Weaponized. When Luke heard this word, his pupils suddenly shrank, and he subconsciously tightened his grip on the silver pendant hanging on his neck. The boy undoubtedly noticed this subtle action, and a trace of desire and greed flashed in his eyes. He then continued to ask, Why? Why did you choose to betray your own race and cooperate with us? The reason is simple. I believe that you have read the history of the Dalent people and understand that there is a watershed in the course of our history. Before that was the era of theocracy, and after that was the era of magic. Unfortunately, the Shadow Guards are a product left over from the era of theocracy. Although we have great power, from the moment we were born, we were destined to only be able to curl up in a dark corner and silently protect the entire civilization. No matter how many sacrifices we make, no matter how many threats we eliminate, we can't obtain power, wealth, and glory. Remember, this situation didn't last a day or two, or a year or two, but thousands of years. If it were you, what would you do? The leader of the Shadow Guards asked meaningfully. As the saying goes, time was the most cruel and ruthless thing in the world. It could make the noble people to become despicable, and it could make the benevolent people become cruel. Nothing, especially the complex. Perhaps the earliest members of the Shadow Guards were indeed willing to sacrifice themselves to silently guard a civilization that had been scarred by war. But with the rapid development of the Dalent people's knowledge, technology, and power, those who joined later were no longer willing, but forced. Coupled with a long period of isolation, it was inevitable that their hearts would become more and more twisted, angrier, and more unreconciled. Until now, both sides were like fire and water. Although they still maintained cooperation on the surface, they were only a step away from becoming enemies. I see. I think I understand. The boy's face showed a thoughtful expression. But I still have a question. Since you have such great power, why don't you just start a coup and fight for your own rights? That's a good question. It's not that we don't want to start a coup, but the council has a powerful magical item, and this magical item is our natural enemy. Even if we just get close to it, every member of the Shadow Guards will lose all their power and become lambs at the mercy of others. The leader laughed and gave the answer. So the real purpose of your cooperation with us is to seize or destroy this magical item. Luke seemed to understand the real purpose of their cooperation. He rubbed his chin and exchanged glances with his brother. But unfortunately, the latter shook his head without batting an eyelid and rejected his silent proposal. The leader of the Shadow Guards noticed the exchange between the two and immediately exposed them with a sneer. Don't waste your energy. If you want to seize that magical item to control us, it's absolutely wishful thinking. Let's not talk about how to use this magical item that only the council members of each generation know. Just a restriction that only the Dalent people can activate it is enough to make you give up on your unrealistic fantasies. Oh, if that's the case, then what's in it for us to cooperate with you? Why would we risk our lives to return to the Dalent people's control? Luke questioned bluntly. Isn't it enough to help you get rid of the endless pursuit? Another member of the Shadow Guards retorted. Not enough. Of course it's not enough. This universe is so vast and boundless. There are civilizations more powerful than the Dalent people, so it's not too difficult to get rid of you. The boy began to bargain expressionlessly, although he had already made up his mind to go back and take back what belonged to him no matter what. Then what do you want? The leader of the Shadow Guards cautiously probed. It's very simple. I want you to help me decipher the secret recorded on the stone pillar. All of it. Not a single bit of concealment. The boy stated his conditions without hesitation. But before the leader could give a reply of agreement or refusal, the shortest member of the Shadow Guards couldn't help but jump out and scold. Dream on. That's a taboo of the Dalent people. Not to mention you, even the council members don't have the right to know the contents recorded on it. Taboo? What I'm most interested in is taboo. Either you give me what I want, and I'll help you destroy that magical item, or you become my enemy and continue this endless pursuit. Believe me, it won't be long before you find out who's the hunter and who's the hunted. Don't forget, we're still young and have unlimited room for improvement. Chapter 1373. Leader, you can't promise them. As you know, only the Shadow Guard have the right to read and keep the contents on the Origin Stone pillar. Apart from that, anyone who tries to decipher it, no matter who they are, will become our mortal enemy. Shut up. You have no right to tell the leader what to do. What do you mean? Could it be that you want to go back on your oath? No, I'm just tired of these endless responsibilities and obligations. That's right. It's time to change. This time, we're doing it for ourselves so that we won't be enslaved anymore. There is no doubt that for the people of Dalent, the stone pillar in the center of the dark lake had a supreme status. That was why when the boy mentioned it, it immediately triggered a fierce dispute within the Shadow Guards. On one hand, it was a heavy responsibility to follow thousands of years of tradition. On the other hand, it was related to everyone's vital interests. Often, it was at this time that the ugliness in human nature could be seen. In just a few minutes, they were divided into two different factions. They stared at each other with swords drawn, as if a battle of life and death would start in the next second. Luke saw this scene and couldn't help but curl his lips slightly. He said to the brother beside him through sign language, "Well done." No, this wasn't done by me. They have always had problems internally. What I've done has only magnified these differences. The boy also used sign language to reply. Just as the two were secretly communicating in private, the leader of the Shadow Guards finally couldn't help but scold loudly. Enough. What do you want to do? Do you want to kill each other and let the bastards in the council laugh at you? But no buts. Remember your identity and position. The leader glared fiercely at the subordinate who tried to continue arguing, turned around, took a deep breath and said, "I can satisfy your request, but the premise is that you must let me see the magic item first. Then I will tell you how to decipher those symbols." The boy nodded gently. "Okay, very fair. Now, you can tell me your plan." "My plan is very simple. As the two of you continue to flee, it would be best for you to help the inhabitants of this planet build a powerful resistance force. Then, seize the opportunity to deal a heavy blow to the expeditionary force controlled by the Council. In this way, we can develop our forces in secret and revive the power flowing in the Dalent bloodline. By the time the Parliament found out, it was already too late to turn the situation around. At that time, we will cooperate with each other to put on a show and let the Shadow Guard successfully capture the two of you." The leader's plan was not complicated. It could even be said that it was very simple and old-fashioned. But what was interesting was that combined with the current complex environment, it could indeed achieve a very perfect effect. In this process, be it the expeditionary army made up of ordinary Dalent soldiers or the resistance army made up of Eniots, all of them would become cannon fodder and be discarded after being used up. Political struggles, in particular, were often darker, uglier, dirtier, and more unscrupulous than most people imagined. As long as they could win, the methods and sacrifices were never important. In any case, the winner could unscrupulously beautify themselves and vilify their enemies. After a few generations, who would still remember the true faces of those losers? At the same time, far away in the Dalent Expeditionary Army camp, the Parliament members were working hard according to the plan, expanding along the underground tunnels that extended in all directions. Every time they advanced and occupied an area, they would place a large number of devices to resist the nuclear force field regardless of the cost. Only in this way could they ensure that their powerful spellcasting abilities would not be restrained and there would not be a strong backlash. But the Eniots were no fools. When they found out that there was a problem with the devices, they immediately launched an intense retaliation. Relying on their innate digging ability, they easily dug out a narrow tunnel in a corner that the Dalent did not notice. Then, they rushed out and destroyed the magical devices without caring about casualties. Then, they used their advantage in numbers to fight the enemy who had lost the support of magic. Not long after, the rapid expansion of the Durantians came to a halt. Instead, it was replaced by endless harassment and assaults. There were no large-scale confrontations. Not to mention, there weren't any spectacular large-scale spells. There were only small groups of a dozen to a few dozen people fighting each other. Under such conditions, the Dalent's greatest advantage could not be used at all, and the casualties were rising steadily. Especially after losing their spellcasting abilities, the death of the spellcasters was enough to make the Parliament's higher-ups furious. There were a few times when they wanted to use some ultimate weapons to directly destroy the planet's core. But in the end, reason prevailed over impulse, and they did not approve those crazy proposals. The reason was simple. They came from afar, not to destroy a planet that was once abandoned, but to bring the two boys back alive. For this, it was worth it even if they had to pay a huge price. Looking at the tragic scene transmitted by the three-dimensional magic projection, the speaker crossed his hands and held his chin, asking with a hoarse voice, "Since the beginning of the war, how many warriors and spellcasters have we lost?" "At least 50,000 warriors and 2,000 spellcasters. Apart from that, the magical devices we have on hand to resist the geocentric force field have also been largely destroyed. Our current inventory is insufficient to complete the suppression of the entire planet." A commander of the expeditionary force wearing the Medal of Honor quickly gave a series of numbers. It could be seen that this commander was not in a good mood at the moment. His eyes were flashing with anger. It should be known that the Medal of Honor was only awarded to the highest commanders of the Expeditionary Army who had won glorious victories. It symbolized the highest honor. Those who wore this medal were, without exception, the elites of the elites. They had participated in at least a dozen evenly matched wars. But now, such a commander was frowning. He could not think of any way to deal with the enemies who were constantly digging holes and launching surprise attacks. Because no matter what he did, the enemy would first destroy the magical devices that suppress the magical devices, causing the spellcasters to lose their combat ability first. Unless they first retracted their forces and restored their absolute advantage in military strength in a certain area. Chapter 1374. Hesitation. Contradiction. As the highest authority of the Dalent civilization, the Parliament was caught in a dilemma. The huge expeditionary army that was supposed to be invincible had once again encountered an unprecedented setback in this world. Not only had they suffered heavy losses before they could achieve their strategic goals, but the anti-nuclear force field device that they had high hopes for did not play a decisive role either. Especially as the Eniots entered a state of war, the birth rate and growth rate of newborns would rapidly increase within a few months and eventually reach a terrifying number. Coupled with this kind of small-scale battle that completely disregarded their own casualties, it wouldn't take long for the expeditionary force's morale to reach the brink of collapse. After all, the Dalent people were also a kind of intelligent life, and they would also develop a state of despair and fear. No matter how the so-called absolute rationality was emphasized, it couldn't cover up this point. "Tell me, Commander, our plan has failed, right?" The speaker was silent for a long time before suddenly asking, without warning. The man wearing the Medal of Glory nodded without hesitation. "That's right, Your Excellency. Our plan number 1 has failed. This world's reaction is much faster than we imagined. From the beginning of the invasion until now, they only launched a full-scale war mobilization in such a short time. I kind of understand why my old friend chose to leave in disappointment back then, fighting in such an unfavorable environment. Even if our civilization is a few levels higher than the opponent, it's difficult to reverse the situation. What about the superweapons? If we use the superweapons, how much do you think we can increase our chances of winning? The speaker narrowed his eyes and continued to ask. Obviously, he was unwilling to swallow the bitter fruit of failure. To be precise, he didn't allow a record of failure during his term of office. Otherwise, those political opponents who remained silent might collectively attack and oust him from the speaker's position. Sorry, please forgive me for being blunt. Based on the current situation, the superweapons we can use aren't many, and it's not enough to completely reverse the situation. It might even cause the enemy to retaliate. You should know best that we don't know much about this world, and we don't know what secrets are hidden in the deepest core of the planet. The Expeditionary Force commander straightforwardly gave his opinion. Having experienced hundreds of battles, he understood that he was now caught in a tug-of-war called quagmire. Either he poured more resources to wear down the enemy, or he chose to retreat while he still had the initiative in his hands to reduce unnecessary losses. From a perspective of pure war, there was nothing wrong with his judgment. Unfortunately, war was never pure. It was a continuation of politics. Take the general mobilization that was rare even in the history of the Dalant civilization, for example. In fact, the current ruling class was unwilling to admit the mistakes they had made, let alone hand over the power in their hands. That was why they started this war. No matter the cost, they had to bring the two boys back alive. Therefore, before experiencing a crushing defeat, the Parliament would never give up on their original plan, nor would they willingly admit defeat to their political opponents and step down from the stage of history. The speaker knew very well that there was nothing wrong with the other party's suggestion, but he still tried to communicate with those who supported him out of the corner of his eye. At the same time, he didn't forget to observe those who opposed him. After a few minutes, he ordered in an emotionless tone, "In the name of the Parliament, I authorize you to use the superweapon, resonance." What? Using resonance in the underground world? Are you crazy? Another Parliament member stood up abruptly. His tone was full of anger and dissatisfaction. Of course I'm not crazy. Instead, I made a decisive judgment based on the current unfavorable situation. As everyone knows, one of our current predicaments is the endless harassment of the enemy and their innate ability to dig holes. Once we use resonance, most of the tunnels in this underground world will collapse. It can cause great damage to the active enemies, their towns, and villages. Most importantly, resonance will only affect the geological structure and won't harm the core. At this stage, this is the only superweapon we can use. The speaker gently knocked on the table and explained. However, the opposing Parliament member was obviously not satisfied with this explanation. He immediately retorted, "But the problem is that resonance is an indiscriminate attack. This means that the places we control will also collapse. Especially the tentacles that we have extended with great difficulty. They will all be destroyed under the attack of resonance. Other than that, resonance will also cause the entire underground world to be isolated. It will probably take dozens or even hundreds of years to open it up again. Don't you think that it's worth it to be able to integrate the bloodlines of two higher life forms into the entire race in just over 100 years?" The chairman asked in a meaningful manner. "But the problem is that you can't guarantee that this plan will succeed, and you've already failed once." The Parliament member stood his ground, unwilling to be outdone. He was not the only one. Many people also showed an expression of agreement. After all, the Dalant civilization was not a centralized empire. Instead, it was an elite group that held the ruling power. Generally speaking, to be able to become the Speaker of the Parliament meant that this person was the most capable and powerful person in the entire civilization. However, once he made a mistake and began to be questioned by other elites, it meant that it was time for him to hand over the highest authority. The speaker clearly felt the threat contained in those eyes. He responded calmly, "Whether it's a failure or not, we can only judge after the final result is out. Please be patient." I'll give you a satisfactory answer." Having said that, he ignored everyone's reaction and loudly ordered again. "Go. Convey the Parliament's authorization. Activate resonance of the superweapon in an hour." "As you wish, Your Excellency." The commander bowed and began to convey the order without saying anything else. Soon, the frontline troops that were constantly fighting the enemy, injured and killed, received the notice. They quickly abandoned their positions and retreated to a relatively safe place. At the same time, the spellcasters worked hard to reinforce the space around the portal and the main areas around it to ensure that it could withstand the structural damage caused by resonance. At the very least, it would not collapse on the spot and bury everyone alive. When everything was ready, a magic device made up of thousands of rings was carefully taken out from the sealed alley and placed in an open space that was heavily guarded. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1375. This is the superweapon, resonance. A young male spellcaster stretched out a finger, attempting to touch the thousands of golden rings of various sizes. But before he could touch them, he was interrupted by an elderly man beside him, who scolded him fiercely. "Idiot, watch your hand, or I don't mind cutting them all down." Resonance is one of the pinnacle masterpieces of the entire civilization. Any touch could lead to serious consequences. If you don't want to die, and if you don't want to kill the people around you, you better behave yourself. I'm sorry, teacher. I just couldn't help myself." The young man quickly lowered his head and admitted his mistake. However, the old man's attention was clearly not on the apprentice. He spoke directly to the commander who was close by. "Please show me the authorization from the council." "Of course. Here." The commander, who wore the Medal of Honor, handed over a black slate. The old man took it and cast a few detection spells to confirm that it was not forged or an order signed involuntarily. Only then did he nod in satisfaction. "That's right. The authorization is valid. Please give the order. In the name of the highest military commander of the expeditionary force, I hereby declare the use of the superweapon resonance in battle. Please begin." The council is still waiting for the results. Having said that, the commander quickly retreated to a safe zone, widening his eyes as he prepared to admire the magnificent scene of the superweapon unleashing its power. There was no superfluous words. After the old man received the order, he immediately got busy with his apprentices. It did not take long for them to complete the simple debugging. Finally, he gently tossed a dazzling pearl into the middle of the ring. In the next second, buzz. The ring that was originally still began to spin around the pearl at high speed, at the same time constantly emitting waves of invisible vibrations. Anything that came into contact with these waves, no matter what it was, would begin to resonate uncontrollably. It would be reduced to a pile of dust in 2 to 3 seconds, or at most a minute. What was more terrifying was that these waves had incredible penetrative power. Other than specific magical defenses, even the toughest crust and metal ores would not be spared. From the start to the end, it had only been about half an hour, and almost 70% of the entire underground world had collapsed. Almost all the towns and villages were drowned by the falling soil and meteors. Only a few lucky ones managed to escape. Resonance, as the name suggested, was to use the power of magic to make everything that the ripples touched resonate with, ultimately destroying the originally indestructible structure from the inside. When this superweapon was first designed, it was used to attack fortified fortresses with a lot of magical defenses. It was not like other superweapons, which were used to directly cause damage to the enemy. However, on planet Ankas, it produced an effect more terrifying than most superweapons. Even the areas around the expeditionary army's camp that weren't particularly tightly reinforced had turned into ruins. Many alchemy puppets were digging and cleaning, trying to open up a tunnel that was submerged in mud and stones. Just as Dalen's men began to clean up the mess, the boy, who was shaking off the thick layer of mud on his body, could not help but complain, "Damn it, had the old fogies of the Dalent Council gone mad? To actually use such a dangerous superweapon like resonance in the underworld." "Resonance? What's that?" Luke fiercely spat out the mud in his mouth and asked with great interest. "As you wish, Resonance is to make non-living things resonate and then disintegrate them into tiny particles. At the very least, it can destroy the internal structure of some sturdy objects. It seems that the council is serious this time. They won't rest until they capture you and me. Also, do you feel it? They've sealed off the space of this planet. We can no longer escape through teleportation. The boy took a deep breath and replied. Luke nodded thoughtfully. I see. They've used this method to destroy the fierce resistance of the natives. At least we don't have to worry about endless harassment for a short period of time. Yes, but they've also cut off transportation. In such a completely sealed environment, it's advantageous for us. With that, the boy drilled out of the ground and began to take a look at the surroundings. Ever since they separated from the Shadow Guards, the two had been heading towards the depths of the planet's core. According to the information obtained from the female mayor, there was an incomparably sacred city in the depths of the planet's core. Its name was Pulla, and it was the original city of this world. It was also the holy land in the hearts of the Eniots. That was because only in this city could they see true light and endless power. Of course, the two boys didn't believe in this mysterious and religious description at all. In their eyes, the so-called true light and endless power was likely to be the scorching core of the planet, as well as the powerful force field generated by the core. But regarding this guess, they needed to see it with their own eyes to confirm it. Looking at the completely blocked tunnel, Luke asked with an uncertain tone, What should we do now? Please don't tell me we have to dig all the way in. No, of course not. Remember the symbols we deciphered before? It's time to put them to use now. As soon as his voice fell, the boy immediately combined the three symbols together and threw it down to the layer of soil below his waist. In an instant, an invisible force soared into the air and quickly gathered the soil into a ball, continuously kneading and squeezing. In the end, a gigantic humanoid clay man was born out of thin air. But apparently, it wasn't under anyone's control. Like an idiot, it bounced around on the spot several times before opening its mouth and devouring the layer of soil on the ground. Slowly, a tunnel leading to the lower layer was opened up, but the clay man was unaware of this. It was still driven by its instincts to devour and strengthen itself. Looking at this strange scene, Luke rubbed his chin and muttered to himself, This is creation? No, it's not creation. At least, it's not a complete creation. You guessed it right. Remember those strange life forms that killed and devoured each other in the Dark Lake? According to my deduction, they were born under the influence of the symbols on the stone pillars. And now, I'm using a part of it. Anyway, the life and death of this world has nothing to do with you and me. It doesn't matter even if this creation eventually devours the entire planet. Chapter 1376. The newly born clay life form was like a gluttonous snake that never tired, constantly devouring the stones and soil that fell from above, and it didn't take long for it to open up a tunnel that extended in all directions. Especially the deepest part near the core, it was rare that it didn't collapse, and the walls seemed to have been burned by some kind of high-temperature flame or magma, showing a colorful, smooth surface that felt like metal and glass. Even if a hard weapon was used to hit it, it wouldn't leave a single trace. Obviously, with the clay life form's current strength, it was not enough to destroy such a solid body, so it quickly turned around and continued to move in another direction. Because it didn't have consciousness, it didn't have the ability to think. It completely relied on the most basic instinct of life to act, devouring all materials that could strengthen itself. Watching this monster that would evolve into who knows what in the future, the boy breathed a sigh of relief and said with a slightly excited tone, Let's go, it's time to see the city built in the depths of the Earth's core, the legendary holy city, Pulla. You have the final say. Luke shrugged indifferently. According to the agreement reached with the Shadow Guards, they needed to go to Pulla and cooperate with the higher-ups of the Inuit to continue to block the Dalen's expeditionary force and ensure that they suffered heavy losses in the process of expansion and suppression. Only in this way could the Shadow Guards have the opportunity to turn the tide. The fierce internal political struggle had always been a life and death struggle. There was no reason and rules to speak of. What's more, The two boys were just outsiders after all. They could never be recognized by the main body of the civilization, let alone hold the highest power. From a certain perspective, they were actually the least threatening and the most ideal partners. In the beginning, the council also intended to use a conciliatory policy through brainwashing and instilling the ideas of the Dalit. Let the boy think that he was a member of this race. But unfortunately, they underestimated the ambition and desire in the boy's heart. As a reincarnator who would occasionally awaken certain memories, knowledge, and ways of thinking from the depths of his soul, it was impossible for the boy to become anyone's slave, puppet, or captive pet. Right now, the only thing he wanted to do was to destroy the Dalit civilization and send this race that tried to control him into the trash heap of history. They continued to walk along the colorful tunnel. After about 7 or 8 days of walking, the temperature of the environment began to rise abruptly. Waves of heat waves hit them in the face, and every step they took was extremely strenuous. What was even more frightening was that as the temperature of the environment increased, the strength of the force field became more and more astonishing. Even controlling the energy to maintain one's body temperature became extremely dangerous. There were a few times when Luke, who was relatively weaker, almost lost control and blew himself up. Fortunately, he reacted quickly enough and cut off the energy supply in time, which allowed him to escape the disaster. However, from then on, he no longer dared to make use of the convenience of magic. Instead, he obediently walked the last part of the journey on foot. When they saw the dazzling light in front of them, the two boys couldn't help but widen their eyes in surprise. At the end of the originally gloomy underground tunnel, a huge object that was emitting light and heat like a fireball suddenly appeared in their line of sight. This was not a star, but the liquid core of a planet. Its size was so huge, and coupled with the fact that it was very close, it was even more dazzling than the stars on most planets, especially the hot liquid substance that was constantly flowing on the surface. Every time it surged, there would be a shockingly hot airflow. The heat waves in the tunnel were transmitted from this place. However, for some unknown reason, this liquid core did not lose pressure because it was exposed to the outside. Instead, it gradually began to cool down and finally change from liquid to solid. On the contrary, its current state was like a star, constantly providing the necessary radiation and energy for this underground world. Below the hot core, there was a dark city. It was so quiet that it was like a dead city. There were no signs of life at all. This is the holy city of Pula. The boy muttered to himself in an uncertain tone. No matter if it is or not, we have to go and take a look, right? Luke, on the other hand, did not think too much. He wiped the sweat on his forehead and strode towards the direction of the entrance. For him who had lived in a desert with an environmental temperature of more than 50 degrees Celsius for a long time, the heat waves emitted by the core had not yet exceeded his tolerance limit. However, he understood that even if he was in such an environment, he would not be able to hold on for long. He had to figure out the truth as soon as possible and then decide whether to stay or leave. In contrast, the boy who grew up like a prince was obviously a little out of breath. Coupled with the fact that he could not use magic to lower his body temperature, his face was very pale. There were even faint signs of dehydration. After about 10 minutes, when the two of them approached the entrance, they suddenly realized that their bodies seemed to have passed through a layer of invisible barrier. In an instant, the originally hot and dry air suddenly became cool and refreshing. Moreover, the city that looked dead from the outside had now become alive. After realizing this, the two of them very tacitly exchanged a look. Without asking, they knew that the outside of the city must be covered with a layer of enchantment or something like magic protection. What was more interesting was that there were almost no male members in this city. At a glance, all of them were pregnant women with big bellies. Many of them who were about to give birth began to lay eggs on the streets under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes. At a glance, it was like a huge city of fertility. Damn it, I think I know why these natives call this the Holy City, the primitive worship of reproduction. Only in such an environment, their descendants can absorb enough energy in a short period of time and grow at an extraordinary speed. The core is their nourishment. At least before the core starts to cool down and deteriorate, they don't have to worry about the extinction of the entire race. Luke licked his lips and praised. You're right. From the perspective of survival, the Eniots are more successful than the Dalent. I'm starting to look forward to meeting their higher-ups to discuss the specifics of the cooperation. As soon as his voice faded, the boy turned his gaze toward a small group of female guards who were quickly approaching them. The guards had obviously noticed that two outsiders who did not belong to their race had intruded and surrounded them in the blink of an eye. Chapter 1377. Outsider. Who are you? Why are you approaching the holy city? The female leader raised the spear in her hand and asked loudly. From her vigilant eyes and extremely nasty attitude, Luke had no doubt that if he did not cooperate, the other party would immediately launch a fatal attack. Furthermore, the spear emitting a shocking amount of energy was definitely not a simple cold weapon, but a powerful magical device. Even though he did not understand how such a thing could be used normally in an environment surrounded by a powerful geocentric force field, he did not want to try it at all. Without any hesitation, the boy directly raised both his hands and replied in fluent local language. Please don't misunderstand. We have no hostility. We just want to talk to your supreme ruler about the invaders. Invaders? The other female on the side subconsciously shook the antennae on her forehead. That's right. The invaders who are attacking you are called the Dalent, a powerful magical civilization that has conquered countless worlds. I know many of their secrets, including the super weapon that caused the collapse of the underground world, resonance. In order to arouse the other party's interest, the boy threw out a bait without hesitation. He clearly knew that the large-scale collapse a few months ago would cause a shocking amount of damage to the civilization living in the underground world. Disregarding everything else, just the fact that the women in this city were forcefully giving birth by overdrawing their life force was the best proof. According to the records of the Dalent, only when the population of the tribe was greatly reduced, Inuit would start to give birth without restraint. Why do you know all this? What is your relationship with the invaders? The female leader obviously did not believe an outsider so easily and continued to interrogate. The well-prepared boy calmly pointed at himself and Luke beside him, and explained with a slightly helpless tone, As you wish, my brother and I are irreconcilable enemies with the Dalent. In order to destroy this group of greedy and shameless raiders, we constantly traversed through various worlds, looking for allies, planning to unite all the forces that can be united, and make these bastards pay for their actions. So now you're looking for us? The female leader narrowed her eyes, slightly restraining the strong hostility from before. That's right. The boy nodded with a serious face. As far as I know, you're the only race in the known world that has successfully repelled the Dalent invasion and successfully defended your homeland. Take a look. This is what the world looked like after it was occupied by the Dalent. Believe me, you would never want your home to become like that. After saying that, he took out a magic item that he had made a long time ago and activated the image data stored in it. In the next second, one by one, the worlds that had been plundered by the Dalent's people had gradually become desolate, or even completely destroyed, were all displayed without leaving a single trace behind. In less than 5 minutes, the expressions on the female guards' faces changed from initial shock to fear, and then from fear to despair. Without personally witnessing the full firepower of Dalent's expeditionary army, one would never be able to imagine that kind of earth-shattering magic and the magnificent scene of a large number of metal golems charging head-on. It was only at this moment that Inuit realized how lucky they were to be able to hold their own against the ferocious invaders. That was right. This was luck. If it weren't for the favorable environment of the underground world and the powerful force field constantly produced by the Earth's core, they wouldn't even have been able to withstand the first wave of attacks. They would have become the target of the invaders' wanton plundering and trampling, just like the other worlds. Follow me. After persevering for more than half an hour to watch the image data, the female leader finally gave up the last trace of hostility. She snatched the magic item that was playing the image data and brought the two boys to the semicircular building in the center of the city. Along the way, the group passed through at least 10 levels of checkpoints and interrogations before finally handing over all their belongings under layers of surveillance and arriving at an empty hall. In the center of the hall, there was a mysterious device that looked like a glass jar. Inside, it was a huge, indescribable fat life form that was soaked in it. To be precise, its upper body had the appearance of an enyot, while its lower body had a large, oval abdomen like a bug. Through the white, translucent skin, one could clearly see that the abdomen that was more than 100 meters long was densely packed with eggs that were in the process of being incubated. Luke's pupils suddenly contracted when he saw this scene. His entire body was instantly drenched in sweat. This was because he could clearly sense that there was an incomparably powerful soul hidden within the body of this ugly creature. Even the mental strength that it unconsciously released could pose a great threat to him. Great Ancestor, Mother of all Eniots, Supreme Queen, Your Majesty, I've brought you two outsiders. They have important information about the invaders. The female leader knelt on one knee and bowed with utmost sincerity. My child, I feel the fear, despair, and anxiety in your heart. Tell me, what kind of information did these two people bring? The mysterious life form, with a series of astonishing titles, finally opened her eyes slowly. Her tone was filled with peace and kindness. Please take a look. This is the information they brought. The enemy is much stronger than we expected. With that, the woman presented the magical device with both hands. However, the mysterious life form didn't activate the magical device like the boy did. Instead, she held it up to her forehead. In less than a second, she looked up with a pair of breathtaking eyes and asked, "Did you collect all of this?" "No, Your Majesty. Only a small portion of these were taken on the spot. The rest are either memories of others or information that we snatched from the Dalen's people. I can assure you that none of the information is exaggerated or false." The boy bowed slightly to show his respect. "Is that so?" The mysterious life form pursed her lips and revealed a meaningful smile. "But I keep feeling that you're deliberately hiding something. Everyone has their own privacy. But I can swear that I won't hesitate to destroy the Dalen's people." The boy carefully guaranteed. Chapter 1378. Secret. How long has it been since I heard that word? The mysterious creature shot a glance at the servants who served her day and night. The latter immediately swarmed forward and carefully flipped her huge lower body to a more comfortable position. Her eyes were so deep and wise that they seemed to be able to dig out the deepest secrets hidden in one's heart. But unfortunately, this kind of shallow mental infiltration didn't have much effect on the strong-willed boy. She maintained a calm expression and replied, "Perhaps to you, who controls an entire race, secret is indeed a foreign and distant word. But to us, who are relatively independent and intelligent beings, secrets are an indispensable part of our daily lives. It is a reference used to differentiate one another and also the embodiment of our self-awareness." Without a doubt, this mysterious creature with terrifying reproductive abilities was the supreme ruler of the Enot people. It was her who created the entire underground world's ancient traditions and civilization from scratch. As for whether she was the true ancestor of this race, it was still uncertain for now. However, as a higher life form through and through, the power she possessed still surpassed that of the most powerful beings of the Darention race. As long as she was willing, she could even mobilize the power of the Earth's core to launch indiscriminate and destructive attacks on her enemies. Independent, the mysterious queen repeated the word, her face showing a mixture of contempt and disdain. Independence means that one will place one's own interests above the intelligence of the race. It means that one will constantly fight for resources, authority, and status. It means that one will not be able to control the situation at the fastest speed at crucial moments. In my impression, independence is a word filled with negativity. I once tried to let my children think independently, but guess what happened in the end? Could it be that they're working together to get rid of you? Luke probed with interest. The queen nodded without hesitation. You guessed it right. After obtaining sufficient freedom, they seemed to have gone mad. Their selfishness in their subconscious mind was magnified infinitely. In the end, they even wanted to kill me, the source of their spirit and bloodline, so as to obtain true independence in the truest sense. That's why I hate independent thinking. Only by maintaining a sense of community can the entire race develop healthily. That's why you hate secrets as well. That's because secrets often mean distrust, and it means that an individual will erode the group. Luke bluntly said what the other party wanted to say. Any monster who is used to controlling everything around them, even the thoughts of intelligent life, would not allow anyone to keep a secret in front of them. Perhaps this secret was even related to the enemy they were fighting. Now, there were only two choices before the two boys. He could either hand over the secret and gain the other party's trust, or they could choose to leave, abandon the original plan of alliance, and come up with a new plan. Hee, all of you are very smart, perhaps even smarter than all of my children put together. I finally understand why those invaders would expend such an astonishing amount of manpower and resources to chase all the way to this world to capture all of you. Along with the Queen's slightly teasing tone, the atmosphere suddenly became tense. In particular, the servants who were in charge of serving her seemed to have entered a state of battle, surrounding the two of them from the inside out. You know where we came from? The boy's pupils suddenly contracted. Of course. Ever since you arrived at that small town, I've been observing you in secret. Even though there are many outsiders who come to the underground world, I have an impression of most of them and can distinguish their races. But you are different. Regardless of your actions, mannerisms, and maturity and cunning beyond your age, all of it proves that you belong to a higher level of life. The Queen had no intention of hiding anything and confidently told him everything she knew. Perhaps in her opinion, the two interesting boys in front of her were firmly under her control, and it was impossible for them to play any tricks. Oh, damn it. What do you think we should do now? Luke purposely pretended to be nervous as he asked his brother. What else can we do? It's not like we haven't experienced something like this before. The boy smiled and shrugged, just as he finished speaking. A second ago, he still had a smile on his face, but now he quickly took out a silver object from his pocket and threw it at the female servants who were filled with hostility. Instantly, a blinding white light illuminated the entire hall. There was no sound. There were no tremors or explosions. However, the hundreds of fully armed female servants were melted into a puddle of gray powder in the white light. No one could escape this calamity. When the heavy guards at the door reacted and tried to rush in to kill the intruders and protect their queen, Luke was already standing beside the queen. He put a collar that was flashing with red light on the target's slender neck and warned with a smile. Stop. Don't come any closer, or else I guarantee that your queen will become a burning torch in less than a second. Bastard. You. How dare you? The female leader was obviously mad, and even her voice was trembling slightly. Retreat. They are serious. The queen seemed to have noticed something and immediately spoke to stop the situation from worsening. Even though she had great strength, her body was still relatively weak. Otherwise, she wouldn't have hidden her entire life in this special city surrounded by a powerful force field. Looking at the female guards who were filled with indignation, anger, and shame slowly retreating, the boy stroked his chin and said to the captive queen, Your Majesty, we should be able to have a good talk now, shouldn't we? Do you think I will compromise? If you dare to harm a single hair on my body, I guarantee that neither of you will be able to walk out of this hall. The queen raised her chin and put on a haughty attitude. Empty threats are the best way to hide the nervousness in your heart. Please don't scare us. We are not easily frightened. Moreover, we don't want to hurt you. We just want to cooperate with you to fight against those intruders. I guarantee that as long as you do as we ask, you will regain your freedom unharmed. When he said this, the boy's tone revealed a commanding tone that could not be refused. Chapter 1379. How to completely control a highly organized and coordinated race. The answer was simple. That was to seize and control their brains. There was no doubt that the queen was the brain of the Inuit people, the only one they obeyed 100%. Moreover, from a simple conversation, Luke could already confirm that this life form that was similar to the queen insect had secretly constructed a huge spiritual network to connect every descendant. As long as she was willing, she could read the contents of the other party's memories at any time. She could even invade the consciousness and use the target's eyes, body, and various organs to do some unspeakable things. It was precisely because of this that Luke decided to take the risk and try to seize the queen, using her life as a threat to force her to serve his plan. Because according to the various knowledge and thoughts in his brain, the higher one stood in power, the more they feared death. In order to escape death, they would often do some despicable things, including betraying the interests of the entire race. Obviously, Luke made the right bet. After a series of probing and threats, the queen finally chose to compromise. Through the mental network, she ordered the surviving descendants to enter a state of total war. In less than half a year, the Eniots, who had lost more than 60% of their population, relied on crazy reproduction and rapid growth to restore their population to its previous level. And these newborns didn't obediently hide. Instead, after simple training, they once again launched an attack at the invaders' base. The suppression force field that Dalen's people built with great difficulty with advanced technology was once again destroyed. They didn't even have time to react before they were drowned by the roaring enemies. Shock. Unconcealable shock. Including the chairman, several higher-ups widened their eyes as they watched the newly built strongholds being destroyed and disintegrated. The massive plan that had just begun was mysteriously destroyed. Even in their dreams, they couldn't figure out how these backward races living in the underground world could grasp their movements in such a short time and even dare to initiate an attack. Weren't they afraid of another resonance? With a series of doubts and puzzlement, the Expeditionary Army's second emergency meeting was held in the camp. The chairman, with a gloomy expression, directly skipped the opening pleasantries and shouted at a shapeshifter leader, "Tell me, what's going on? Why did our enemy react so quickly? Didn't you say a while ago that they were retreating deeper underground?" "Sorry, sir, we did our best. Please take a look. This is the list of shapeshifters killed in the recent period. The enemy seems to be able to distinguish who is real and who is in disguise through a certain method." The shapeshifter leader bitterly smiled as he placed a black slate on the table. After a short period of reading, everyone who saw it had undisguised surprise on their faces. As the strongest infiltration tool, shapeshifters had always been the trump card of the Expeditionary Army to gather intelligence and set off a bloody storm within the enemy. But this time, they had lost more than half of their forces as soon as they made their move. Most of them were discovered as soon as they laid low, and then they were surrounded and killed. Unbelievable. How do they do this? A senior commander asked with a frown. The shapeshifter leader shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. Even the members who escaped from the front lines didn't know what happened. They only know that the enemies, who were originally retreating in a panic, suddenly seemed to have received some kind of order and began to methodically rebuild their homes in certain places. At the same time, they sped up and desperately gave birth. Did your people not notice anything unusual? For example, a messenger or some kind of magical communication?" The commander was clearly unwilling to give up and continued to ask. In his view, this abnormal behavior was clearly an order from the higher-ups. "Really, I think we might need to reevaluate the enemy. Obviously, the Eniots are using a power we don't understand, and this power is common among them." A council member lightly knocked on the table and concluded, "You mean retreat?" Another council member carefully glanced at the chairman from the corner of his eye. At this moment, anyone who wasn't an idiot could feel that this old man who held the highest authority in the entire civilization was like a volcano that was about to erupt. But the opposing council member didn't care about this and replied with a sneer, "Of course we have to retreat. Otherwise, do we continue to waste our precious resources and trained warriors and spellcasters? Don't forget, the reason we're sitting here isn't to protect the interests of an individual, but to protect the interests of the entire civilization." "Are you talking about me?" The chairman narrowed his eyes, and his pupils flickered with a dangerous glint. "No, you're mistaken, Your Excellency. I'm only talking about those who put their own rights above the entire civilization." The council member didn't back down and retorted. Just as sparks began to appear in their eyes, and they were about to go further, the light in the environment suddenly dimmed. The next second, a black shadow appeared out of thin air and mocked with a deep and hoarse voice. "Aha! What did I just see? A struggle for power. The council that shouldered the rise and fall of the entire civilization has fallen to such a state. It's you." The chairman's expression changed drastically, and he subconsciously grabbed the powerful magical item he was keeping. Seeing his action, the black shadow sneered and curled his lips. "Are you that afraid of me? Afraid of me? Even relying on that thing to give you courage? A few thousand years ago, the chairman could easily suppress us with his own strength." "Shut up. This is the council. It's not your place to interrupt. State your intentions." The chairman interrupted without holding back. Chapter 1380. You want a pardon? The speaker, who was extremely sensitive to politics and power, immediately figured out what the other party wanted from him. As the leader of the highest authority of the entire civilization, he had many privileges that ordinary Dalent people could only dream of in their lifetime. Among them, pardons were the most basic and also the easiest to get. Even he himself could not remember how many pardons he had signed since he took office. But the problem was that there had never been a culprit who had killed and destroyed unscrupulously on the mother planet who had been pardoned. If he really handed over the pardons, he would immediately become the target of hostility and hatred of countless people. He could basically say goodbye to the political stage. That's right. I need pardons to ensure that they won't do anything extreme at the last moment. The leader of the Shadow Guards gave an affirmative answer without hesitation. Obviously, it was impossible for him to not know the stakes involved in this pardon. He just wanted to embarrass the other party and let this high and mighty chairman taste pain and helplessness. Just like all people who had been suppressed and treated unfairly for a long time, a lot of anger and dissatisfaction had accumulated in the heart of every member of the Shadow Guards. The reason why they did not show it before was not because they did not have a temper, but because they had not found a way to vent. But now, with the Expeditionary Army's repeated failures, these guys could no longer hold back their restless hearts. They longed to return to the center of power and seize what they had lost. This kind of strong emotion and ambition could be clearly felt by every Dalent higher-up present. But for some reason, every one of them subconsciously ignored this point. Including the opposition members and the Expeditionary Army commander, without exception, they ignored the members of the Shadow Guards who had been constantly in contact with low-level warriors and spellcasters during this period of time, allowing these guys to expand their influence. Right now, the Shadow Guards, which should have been full of obscurity, was already known by most people. Some of the relatively younger guys even began to worship this group of powerful heroes who had turned the tide several times. Looking at the ambition flashing in the other party's eyes, the speaker took a deep breath and asked in an incomparably serious tone, "Are you sure that a pardon can bring the two boys back unharmed?" "Of course." The leader of the Shadow Guards nodded carefully. "Apart from that, I also need the Expeditionary Army's help to lure them out from the depths of the earth." "As you wish. But let me put it bluntly. If you don't fulfill your promise, then everything that I've promised you before will be in vain." As he spoke, the chairman took out a blank black slate and entered some information into it as quickly as he could before attaching his personal magical imprint. In this way, a legal pardon statement was completed. Now, no matter who it was, as long as they entered their name, no matter how unforgivable their crimes were, they would not have to worry about being hunted down and judged. "Thank you very much. I swear, it won't be long before you see those two naughty little guys again." The leader of the Shadow Guards bowed slightly, and there was a hint of playfulness in his tone. After he turned around and left, a counselor who had remained silent from the beginning to the end suddenly asked, "I don't understand. Why did you agree to his request?" According to the rules set by the Parliament when it was first established, the Shadow Guards should never appear in public again. In particular, The power they possess must be strictly limited to 2 digits. Otherwise, enough. I know what I'm doing. Without waiting for the counselor to finish speaking, the chairman rudely interrupted him. Times are changing. When the Parliament was first established, it was mainly because we had just experienced a tragic war, a war between divine authority and mortals. Therefore, restricting divine authority and the power that is deeply embedded in the depths of our souls naturally became the most important thing. But now, with the increasing prosperity of magical power, we have broken away from the shadows of the past. Moreover, we have invented countless spells and weapons that can kill gods. There is no need to continue clinging to those rigid rules and not let go. Moreover, the reason why the Shadow Guards are united now is not because they are too few in number. Think about it. When their members expand to 3 digits for digits, 5 digits, will everyone still obediently listen to one person's orders? No, of course not. They will split. They will be like us now, with all kinds of ideas and factions. When that time comes, the Parliament can infiltrate the Shadow Guards and truly turn them into a sharp weapon to be used against our enemies. You mean to allow them to expand the number and influence of the Shadow Guards? The counselor's eyes widened as if he had heard some shocking words. Yes, times have changed. From the moment those 2 boys appeared, our civilization has welcomed a new opportunity and challenge. I know that some of you are against me, hoping that I will taste the bitter fruit of failure and hand over the power in my hands. But have you ever thought about whether the people who will lead me have the ability to make the right judgment in such a complicated situation? The chairman used a sharp gaze to sweep across those who had a disdainful or indifferent expression on their faces. But what was interesting was that for some reason, these people kept silent without any discussion. They did not express any opinions, nor did they make any fierce rebuttals. They seemed to have decided that no matter what the chairman did, he would definitely fail in the end. Instead of wasting energy to argue and quarrel now, it was better to wait patiently for the results and then clean up the mess. At the same time, the leader of the Shadow Guards who had received a pardon had now returned to the deep underground tens of thousands of kilometers away from the Expeditionary Army camp. With an incomparably cold voice, he said to a few expectant companions, "Rejoice, my brothers and sisters. Those idiots from the Parliament have finally handed this thing to me. Now, what you have to do is to follow the plan and spread the news to the ears of every member of the Expeditionary Army. I'd like to see how long he can hold on to power in the situation where he has lost the support of the people. When he disgracefully steps down and the Parliament descends into chaos and power struggles, that will be the day we return to the center of power. Thousands of years of anger, repression, silence. All of this will erupt like a volcano in the near future. Facts will prove that we are the ones who can shoulder the glory and responsibility and lead the entire race forward." Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1381. Herd mentality referred to when individuals were influenced by the behavior of the outside world, and their perception, judgment, and cognition would conform to public opinion or the behavior of the majority. As a member of a group, very few people could maintain absolute calm and independence, unaffected by other people or the environment. Following the announcement that the Parliament and the Speaker would pardon the alien boy who caused a terrible disaster on the mother planet, the entire Expeditionary Army camp fell into an unprecedented uproar. Everyone, whether intentional or not, was fiercely debating with each other and even attacking each other personally, hoping to figure out what made the higher-ups do such a crazy and stupid thing. Especially in this disaster, a respected Parliament member was killed, and even his body was not left intact. No one realized that after the mastermind achieved his goal, he left quietly and left the mess to the Parliament to slowly deal with. Although the Dalent people's unique rationality did not let this protest and debate develop into a riot, but as the saying went, once the seed of distrust was planted, it would one day bear the fruit of betrayal. On the other side, the 2 boys who held the Inuit queen hostage had now completely controlled the building in the most central area of the holy city. In this place that was originally filled with a large number of servants and guards, only 3 people were left. And those who were originally responsible for taking care of the queen were only allowed to enter for a short period of time, every day when feeding and cleaning. It had to be said that this feeling of being in the enemy's lair and constantly being on the edge was really not a good feeling. In order to prevent the queen from making any secret moves, the 2 people had to take turns to ensure that one of them was always awake. At the same time, they had to pay close attention to the queen's every move, including the mental power she emitted from time to time. Feeling the exhaustion and sleepiness brought about by long-term lack of sleep, Luke couldn't help but yawn. Without turning his head, he asked, "How is it? How far is the plan? Can't we leave this damn place yet?" "Don't worry, be patient, it's almost done." The boy also rubbed his forehead and responded, "Patience? When I asked you a week ago, you answer like this. Please, if this continues, we'll be killed by those damn guards outside before the Dalent people find us." Luke rolled his eyes in annoyance. Although the queen had been very cooperative these days and did not have the slightest intention of disobeying. However, he dared to guarantee with his head that as long as there was the slightest chance, this insect queen with an abnormally large lower body would kill him without hesitation and regain her freedom. What was even more frightening was that with the lack of sleep, the 2 of them began to be affected by the queen's ever-present spiritual power. Even her figure would occasionally appear in their dreams. One must know that this was not a good sign. In the long run, there was no telling when the other party would suddenly invade his spiritual world. Just as the boy opened his mouth to say something, the queen, who was resting with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her eyes. She stared at the rightmost corner of the hall and shouted, "Intruder! Someone come! Someone come quickly! Intruders!" Luke's nerves instantly tensed up, and he quickly stood beside the queen, not forgetting to glance at the entrance to the outside at the same time. In less than a minute, a large number of fully armed guards swarmed in. For a moment, even the air froze. Who's there?" The boy narrowed his eyes and carefully probed. However, from his actions, rather than saying that he was guarding against an invisible intruder, it was more accurate to say that he was guarding against these guards who were armed to the teeth. Only God knew what kind of order the queen gave through the spiritual network. Perhaps this was a farce from the beginning to the end, a show used to test their reactions. However, the boy quickly overturned his guess. From the dark corner, a slender shadow slowly walked out and said with a smile, "Relax, don't be so nervous. I'm not an enemy. I'm a member of the Shadow Guards, and I'm here under the orders of the leader to pass on a message. The time is ripe." "The time is ripe? Are you sure?" Luke's eyes widened, as if he could not believe what he had just heard. "That's right. This is your declaration of pardon. Next, the leader hopes that you can act according to the plan. In return, this is a part of the secrets regarding the stone pillars, and I can give it to you first." As he spoke, the shadow threw over a stone that was densely carved with slow symbols. Unlike the symbols on the stone pillars that required a large amount of time to decipher, these symbols were never seen before, but as long as one touched them with a finger, they would immediately transform into an abstract concept that could be understood. There was no need to ask to know that this was a miraculous reading spell. From the moment it was created, it was to allow more people to read and understand it. However, the boy clearly did not have the mood to read the contents of the stone. He replied straightforwardly, "Understood. We will act according to the plan. However, there is a prerequisite. Once we discover that our lives are in danger, we will definitely choose to escape immediately. Of course, this is your right and freedom. Also, please don't be so hostile. The way we do things is completely different from the Parliament, and it won't take long for you to realize this." As he spoke, the shadow showed an unusual excitement and agitation, as if victory was already within his grasp. Soon, as this member of the Shadow Guards left, the hall returned to its previous tranquility. The guards who had rushed in also slowly retreated under the Queen's instructions. Once all the unrelated personnel had left, the Queen asked in a meaningful tone, "Who was that intruder just now? Where are the Shadow Guards? Looks like your relationship with the Dalent is more complicated than I expected, isn't it?" "Ah, Our relationship is indeed a little complicated. However, you don't have to worry about this. We will take care of it ourselves." The boy pursed his lips, a faint smile on his face. As the saying goes, might is the truth. Now that he had the other party's life in his hands, he naturally did not need to be as careful as he had been when they first met, nor did he have the obligation to answer the other party's questions. In contrast, Luke was more concerned about the mysterious stone. He snatched it over, his brain working furiously as he read the massive amount of information stored within. About 10 minutes later, he recovered from his state of concentration and broke into a smile as he muttered to himself, "Oh, this is some incredible information." Chapter 1382. The origin had always been a secret that countless civilizations in the universe had always wanted to figure out. Generally speaking, any intelligent race that went from wilderness to civilization would give birth to all kinds of myths and legends, and even some absurd and strange stories. But these stories often hid some content related to the truth. There is no doubt that the origin of the Dalant people was different from other races. There was neither the so-called creation myth nor too many exaggerated descriptions. Everything was so plain and close to life. This strange phenomenon either showed that they lacked imagination and couldn't create enough exciting stories, or they broke away from ignorance at the stage of their birth and recorded their origin in the truest way. Obviously, with the intelligence and creative ability shown by the Dalant people, they didn't seem to lack imagination. Therefore, in Luke's mind, he always leaned toward the latter. Now, when he finished reading the information stored in the stone in his hand, he was more and more certain that the seemingly simple historical record definitely hid an amazing secret. Especially the god who created the first generation of Dalant people. It was very likely that he wasn't just a god. Whether it was the pure soul fragment at the bottom of the dark lake or the monster that couldn't be killed no matter how hard they tried, they all revealed a strong sense of abnormality. Do you think the information recorded in this stone is credible? The boy clenched the stone that emitted a faint temperature, and his eyes flashed with strong doubts. The reason was very simple. Although this stone was old, it was far from the birth of the first generation of Dalant people. Therefore, it was very likely to be forged. However, Luke responded without hesitation. "Of course it's credible. I understand your suspicions, but don't forget that the Shadow Guards need to pay us a whole chain of evidence, not a few simple, confusing clues. This also means that if they want to forge this matter, they must ensure that there is no logical flaw from the beginning to the end. Don't forget that we still have the symbols in our hands that haven't been completely deciphered. They don't know how much we have deciphered or which part." "You have a point." The boy nodded gently, then looked at the queen who was staring at him, trying to read his shallow thoughts. "Since the time is ripe, how should we deal with this honorable captive?" "Ha, do you still need to ask?" "Of course, we'll deal with it the old way. For us, it doesn't matter what the planet becomes. What's more, I don't want to be constantly on guard against a dagger behind my back while I'm on my journey." Luke raised his hand and snapped his fingers. "Ha!" Along with the crisp crosstalk, the collar on the queen's neck suddenly released a dark blue mist. Before she could react to what had happened, her upper body was covered in ice, but her bug-like lower body still maintained its normal functions. "This is..." The boy's pupils contracted as if he had seen something incredible. This was the power that Dalant had mentioned before, a mysterious power that could freeze everything in the world. "I've only been able to try it out recently." Luke caressed the crystal hanging around his neck and explained casually. In fact, the reason why he had embedded a ruby that stored scorching flame energy on the collar was to conceal the dark blue liquid hidden inside the collar. Even though there was only one drop, it was enough to render the most powerful life form in the world powerless. "Interesting. This is really interesting. I can't wait anymore, as if I want to take back my share." The boy licked his lips greedily as he walked closer to observe carefully. Unfortunately, other than being still, he couldn't feel anything at all. Even a magic energy nearby was frozen. After killing the queen, the guards outside could rush in at any time. The two of them didn't stay for too long and quickly used tools to dig out a place behind the throne that was big enough for two people to hide. Finally, they sealed the only exit to the outside world and patiently waited for the right time. About an hour later, when the servants came in to serve the queen, a scream echoed in the empty hall. "Oh, Her Majesty, Her Majesty the Queen has been frozen into ice." What? What happened? Damn it. It must be those two intruders. Quick, they must not have run far. Bring these two bastards back to me. Don't just stand there. Use your body to melt the ice. With Her Majesty the Queen's strong vitality, she will definitely come back to life. As the highest leader of the entire race, the Queen's importance was self-evident. In just a few seconds, the entire hall was in chaos. Those who were qualified to give orders were desperately trying to salvage the situation and ensure that nothing happened to the Queen. After all, she had ruled the underground world for more than tens of thousands of years. Every Annette viewed her as their closest mother and supreme spiritual belief. If she really died, the holy city would instantly fall into chaos. No one else had the qualifications to stand out and become the new queen, commanding the entire race to continue resisting the intruders. No one noticed that while the situation was in chaos, two inconspicuous figures quietly sneaked into the crowd and slipped out. Even though their appearance was obviously different from the Annette people, and they even used cloaks to cover their faces and bodies the entire time, the panicked servants subconsciously ignored this point. When the two used poison to overturn the city gate guards and successfully escaped the area covered by the barrier, Luke let out a sigh of relief. Feeling the heat wave in his face, he teased with a smile. "It's much easier than we thought, isn't it? This is the weakness of a high degree of centralization. Once the central command center is lost, the entire system will instantly fall into a paralyzed state." The boy hit the nail on the head with his evaluation. Just as he said, a high degree of centralization, even when power was concentrated in the hands of a dictator, could display 120% efficiency. But the weakness was also very obvious. Once the central command center was controlled or destroyed, the other organizations that were used to following orders would instantly fall into endless chaos and self-contradiction. Chapter 1383. Where are we going next? The upper level? Luke asked in an uncertain tone as he rubbed his chin while looking at the tunnel that had been expanded countless times by the clay life form. As time passed, this creature that was originally created as a tool had obviously grown a lot. It was like a huge whale that constantly shuttled through the world, devouring everything that could be digested. Right now, the walls that were abnormally smooth and hard could no longer stop it from moving forward. It would probably not take long for it to reach the core of the planet and devour the magical city. The boy was obviously very interested in the evolution of the clay life form. He rubbed his chin and hesitated for a moment before replying, "No hurry. Let's go see how that little guy is doing." Little guy? Luke had a strange expression on his face. "The little guy you're referring to is not little at all. Ha ha. In the eyes of a father, a child will always be a child, no matter how big it becomes," the boy replied with a double meaning. "Father? Even if you created it, you're still an unqualified father. And I have a feeling that this planet will be destroyed by it sooner or later." Luke sneered and shrugged his shoulders. Almost all creators like to treat the life forms that they created as their own children. They would even call themselves father or mother. However, in reality, they rarely fulfilled the responsibilities and obligations that a father and mother should fulfill. Especially examples like the clay life form that was created and left to its own devices were simply too many to count. The only difference was that this clay life form was not a complete life form. It had no intelligence, no thoughts, and no sense of danger. It only knew how to eat, and eat until it ate the entire planet. Wherever they passed, all the tunnels would widen and even form a huge karst cave. It did not take long for the two of them to catch up with the constantly moving clay life form. Compared to when it was first born, it had expanded by more than 3,000 times. From afar, it looked like a mountain, a prehistoric beast from ancient times. Just its torso alone had reached an astonishing 60 kilometers. Moreover, the originally loose clay on the surface of its body had solidified into crimson elastic skin that was covered with moss of various colors. Rumble, along with the violent wriggling and the vibrations caused by its body squeezing the surrounding soil, every step it took would make a loud noise. Especially in the underground world, these sounds would constantly reverberate between the walls, forming resonance and echoes. The corner of the boy's mouth twitched when he sensed the terrifying aura coming at him. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Damn it, this kind of growth speed is a little beyond my expectations. What are you going to do with it?" Luke pursed his lips and asked gloatingly. One had to know that as the amount of clay, stones, and minerals it devoured increased, the behemoth was getting closer and closer to its elemental form. As the name implied, the final evolution direction of the elemental form was the elemental life form. This was especially true for earth elementals, which were closely linked to the core of the planet. Unless the entire planet was completely destroyed, there was nothing that could truly kill them. They were one of the most difficult enemies to deal with. Perhaps we can use it to its full potential in the upcoming battle. At the same time, we can test if Dalen's people have any trump cards that I haven't seen yet. The boy grinned sinisterly. After all, even Dalen's people would have to pay a heavy price if they wanted to deal with such a monster in the underground world. This was in line with his attempt to destroy the entire Dalant civilization. But the problem is, how are you going to make it act according to your orders? I'll say this first. I don't want to fight such a monster on the battlefield. Luke glanced at the behemoth in the distance with lingering fear. Due to the effect of the geocentric force field, all spellcasters could not even use 1/10 of their strength here, let alone those powerful destructive spells. As such, it was basically impossible to kill a monster that had almost unlimited vitality and could recover its strength by devouring the surrounding soil, stones, and minerals at any time. However, the boy was obviously holding back. He explained with a smile, "Relax. Do you think I'm stupid enough to let a monster that I can't control join the battlefield? No, I might not be able to make it obey my orders 100%, but I can still make sure that it doesn't attack my people." As soon as he finished speaking, the boy quickly carved a rune from the stone pillar on the back of his hand. Then, he stood on the path that the clay creature had to pass through. The brash monster that did not know how to dodge magically stopped less than 10 meters away, as if it was confirming something. About 2 minutes later, it quickly changed direction and continued to move in the other direction. How is it? A small rune can solve all your problems. The boy smiled faintly as he raised the back of his hand with the rune carved on it. Well done. Maybe we should find a time to exchange the parts that we deciphered, Luke suggested meaningfully. He could feel that the boy's speed and quantity of deciphering were clearly above his own, so it was necessary to exchange parts. The boy nodded without hesitation. No problem. It's better to take responsibility in the present. How about now? Just as well, I need some time to plan a path for this gluttonous boy and make sure that it will appear on the correct battlefield at the correct time. Why don't you just let it charge into the Dalant Expeditionary Army's camp? Wouldn't that be a better way to test the enemy's true trump card? Luke proposed his own opinion. In his opinion, the most important thing to do in order to deal a heavy blow to the Dalant civilization was to annihilate the enemy's living forces as much as possible so that they could not maintain their vast and cruel rule of plundering. After all, an experienced expeditionary army could not be casually recruited from the civilians. Not only did they need a long time to learn and cultivate, they also needed to rely on places with lower combat intensity to conduct actual combat tests. Bit by bit, they had to cultivate their combat experience and awareness. It was impossible to cultivate a truly qualified expeditionary army just by relying on some illusions created by magic. Once the foundation of governance collapsed, the resources that maintained the operation of the mother planet would become abnormally poor. Poor resources meant that there was no way to cultivate an army and conduct advanced research. Even their daily lives would be severely affected. Over time, this powerful magic civilization would decline from its peak and fall into a state of eternal damnation. Like all other civilizations, it would eventually be destroyed. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1384. The upper region of the underground world had become the place where the Dalent and Inuit engaged in a bloody tug-of-war, especially the tunnels of various sizes that extended in all directions. They were like a huge millstone that constantly crushed living beings into blood, minced meat, and mutilated corpses. In this war, where there was no end in sight and no one could obtain the final victory, the soldiers at the bottom were often like a series of cold numbers. No one cared about their life or death at all. They were just routinely sent out every day. As for how many of them could return alive, it depended on their own luck. Compared to the well-equipped Dalent, the Inuit had obviously suffered more losses. But because they had the ability to reproduce quickly, not only were they not repelled by the enemy in some areas, but they also firmly held the initiative. Perhaps it might sound absurd. The reason why the Inuit could hold the initiative wasn't because of how many enemies they killed, but because the soldiers they sent out would die on the way. They weren't like the Dalent, who brought back the exhaustion and fear from the fierce battles every day. Then, the next day, they would send a group of young people who had just grown up quickly to their deaths. This strange scene was repeated over and over again, as young people were the easiest group to brainwash and incite. As long as the things that happened on the battlefield never spread back, the Inuit could maintain their high morale. To them, the death of a few generations wasn't a big deal at all. As long as the Great Queen was still ruling over the entire race in the depths of the Earth's core, no matter what losses they suffered, they could slowly make up for it after they won. But what was interesting was that no one knew that the real queen had been frozen and the holy city had fallen into unprecedented chaos. It's the smell of blood. I like it here. The boys stood in the tunnel filled with Inuit corpses and took a deep breath with an intoxicated expression. Blood? What excites you is not blood, but death and the wandering souls in the air. Luke, who was following closely behind, corrected him. After shuttling through the lower region for a long time, they finally arrived at the battlefield. The huge clay life form was pacing back and forth in the tunnel behind them, gobbling up the corpses, weapons, and armors that fell on the ground. When this big guy that didn't know what satisfaction was appeared near the battlefield, both the Dalent and the Inuit became delicious snacks without exception. In fact, this was the 6th time the two had launched an indiscriminate attack in the past 2 to 3 days, killing all life in the battlefield. Perhaps to the Inuit, who were used to being wiped out, this situation was meaningless. But to the Dalent, who saw every expeditionary army member as a precious asset, this was a very clear signal. Looking at the tunnel that had been cleared in just a few minutes, Luke asked in an uncertain tone, "How many more times do you think we have to do this before they can't help but take countermeasures?" Maybe 3 or 4, maybe 7 or 8 times. It's hard to say. You have to understand that the chairman isn't a person whose thoughts are easily guessed. Almost every time he makes a decision, it will surprise many people. But don't worry, once the number of casualties reaches a certain critical point, even he will have to stand up and declare his position. The boy hesitated for a moment and quickly gave a vague answer. Although he had lived on the Dalent's home planet for 12 years, he had only seen the chairman 11 times in total, and each time was on his birthday. Of course, this birthday did not refer to his birth date in the strict sense, but the day he was found and adopted by the Dalent. So in his impression, the chairman had always been a serious and unlikable elder. As for what achievements the chairman had made in the past, and why he was elected as the highest leader of the entire civilization, he had no idea. So, next, we have to continue to provoke the Dalent and force their higher-ups to stand up and fight, instead of hiding like cowards and watching the number of casualties increase every day. Luke teased with a slightly sarcastic tone while fiddling with the smashed force field suppression device. Ha ha ha, I like your sense of humor. When the boy heard this, he could not help but laugh. The people of Dalent are not what you think they are. On the contrary, at the critical moment that determines the rise and fall of the entire civilization, they're never afraid of death and challenges, even if it is the higher-ups who hold great power and resources. No, you're wrong, my dear brother. The nature of human nature is despicable, selfish, and ugly. Perhaps it will erupt at some point in time with feelings that can be called noble, but these feelings usually don't last long. Just watch. I'll prove to you that when a civilization begins to decline, the first to begin to decay are usually those high and mighty big shots. After saying this, Luke pursed his lips and revealed a chilling smile. Just as the boy was about to say something, a series of footsteps suddenly came from the originally quiet passage. About 2 or 3 minutes later, a standard exploration team composed of elite Dalent soldiers and spellcasters suddenly entered their line of sight. When the leader saw the familiar face of the boy, his eyes immediately lit up and he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Quick! Charge! Capture those 2 boys! They're the targets of the Council's bounty." What? Oh my God! We're finally lucky for once. Don't just stand there. Do it. This is the area affected by the Earth's nuclear force field. As spellcasters, they can't exert any power at all. After a brief communication, every member of the entire team was in a state of ecstasy. They charged forward recklessly, attempting to capture the 2 boys and bring them back unharmed, becoming heroes that everyone envied. This was not to be underestimated. Once they obtained such a title, regardless of whether they continued to develop in the army, returned to the mother planet to further their studies, or entered the Council in the future, they would receive good bonus points. Moreover, just the huge bounty offered by the Council was enough to drive most of the Dalent into a frenzy. However, no one noticed that at the end of the tunnel not far away, a huge monster was silently lurking there, motionless. As long as it charged forward, it could devour everything within a few kilometers in a matter of seconds. Chapter 1385. I really don't know if I should admire your courage or laugh at your stupidity. Gazing at the enemies who were quickly dispersing and surrounding them from all directions, as well as the spellcaster who carried a suppressive force field device and stood in place chanting incantations, the boy's face showed undisguised mockery. The next second, he merely drew a symbol in the air out of thin air. Immediately after, the colossal creature that had remained still rushed out of the dark corner with the force of a thunderbolt. Boom! There was no surprise. The impact generated by its astonishing size instantly crushed more than half of the members of the scouting team into minced meat. However, this was not the most terrifying thing. The most terrifying thing was that the clay lifeform's body was always surrounded by a terrifying gravitational force. Before the spellcaster could react to what had happened, the bones that supported the body let out a crisp sound that could only be heard when they were broken. Then, with a look of horror and despair, they fell to the ground, tasting the serious consequences of the energy backlash. In just a single exchange, the Dalent exploration team, which had been full of confidence, was completely annihilated. Not a single one of them was left standing. No, 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 this. What kind of monster is this? Why would it listen to your orders? You shouldn't be able to cast powerful spells. The team leader, who only had half a breath left, widened his eyes, desperately trying to see clearly the opponent that had killed him before he died. In his inherent image, such a gigantic elemental life form would definitely require hundreds or even thousands of the best spellcasters of the Dalent to gather together and carry out a complicated magical ritual that would take hours or even weeks. Under the influence of the Earth's nuclear force field, not to mention a magical ritual of this level, even magic that had been weakened by 100 times would be difficult to complete. It was precisely because of such limitations that the expeditionary army would be overwhelmed by the endless sea of enemies time and time again. Otherwise, under the large-scale magical attacks, any backward civilization would not be able to resist the expeditionary army for more than a few months. Magic? You think my power comes from magic? Idiot! My power comes from knowledge, from a clever mind, and from always calm and rational judgment. Even under unfavorable conditions, I can find a way to reverse the situation. In this regard, you who are used to using violent means to solve problems will not be able to understand at all. The boy stretched out a finger and gently tapped his temple. He didn't hide the contempt in his eyes at all, just like how the Dalent looked at the inferior races that they had enslaved. Under the gaze of that pair of deep black eyes, the leader felt an intense fear that came from the depths of his heart. It was as if an incomparably powerful God had seen through his body and directly seen through all the secrets in the depths of his soul. With pain, unwillingness, and fear, he slowly took his last breath. You seem to have rather complicated feelings about the Dalent civilization? Luke asked with great interest. The boy smiled and shrugged his shoulders. Maybe. After all, ever since I was born, I have been learning and accepting the Dalent people's thoughts, values, and worldview. It can be said that half of me today inherited the legacy of my previous life, and the other half came from this civilization. Do you know why I haven't given myself a name yet? Why? Luke asked very cooperatively. Of course, it's to wait for the Dalent civilization to be completely destroyed. According to their tradition, on the ruins of the mother planet, I will give myself a resounding name. Only by saying goodbye to the past can I fully devote myself to the future. This is the ancient proverb of the Dalent people, and it is also the obsession in the depths of my heart. When he said this, the boy's tone revealed a rare seriousness and persistence. For him, the Dalent civilization was a shadow that shrouded his heart. As long as it didn't disappear, his heart would not be able to find peace. Therefore, whether it was for rational needs or emotional needs, the Dalent people were bound to be destroyed. Understood. I will help you complete the entire plan. Luke, who realized the seriousness of the problem, nodded slightly. Just as the two of them were about to open their hearts and engage in some in-depth communication, a dazzling light suddenly shot from the end of the tunnel and directly hit the thick body of the clay life. In an instant, the skin that was able to withstand the sharpest magic weapon was forcibly cut open, and a wound of about 10 meters deep was forcibly cut open. Then, one by one, old guys exuding an astonishing aura slowly walked out from the dark corners. Without asking, they were senior members of the council, including the speaker. Each of them could be called a big shot. The powerful light that he had just received came from the magic staff that was flickering with white light in the hands of the chairman. Ah, you're finally here. Just a few minutes ago, my brother and I were still discussing how long the council would endure. I didn't expect you to take action so quickly. The boy politely bowed with one hand on his chest. Put down your weapon and come back with us. You have lived on a mother planet for 12 years, so you should know how powerful the Dalent civilization is. Unless you die, you can't escape. The speaker didn't waste any time and directly gave an ultimatum. As the situation had been rapidly developing in an uncontrollable direction, the pressure on him had also increased. Perhaps he would be ousted from the position at any time. If that day really came, no matter how many methods and countermeasures there were, it would become meaningless. Therefore, his purpose was very simple. That was to cut the Gordian knot and take down the two boys who entered his sight. As for the rest, he would slowly think about it after returning to the mother planet. Powerful? Is that how you see the Dalent civilization? No, it's not as powerful as you think. In fact, it's very fragile, just like an egg wrapped in a hard shell. As long as the outermost shell is broken, the thing inside is nothing to be afraid of. Now, what I want to do is to be the first one to break the shell. As soon as he finished speaking, with lightning speed, the boy wrote a series of mysterious symbols in the air. The next second, the clay life seemed to have received a strong external stimulus and began to twist its body crazily. It rampaged in the passage, destroying and devouring all the living things it could sense. It seems that you have made the wrong choice. Well, we will make you pay for your arrogance and ignorance. Next, you will face the most powerful spellcaster group in the entire Dalent civilization, the Council. Chapter 1386. There was no doubt that if the entire Dalent civilization was compared to an egg, then the Council was the egg yolk that gathered all the essences. In terms of numbers, the Council had always maintained the size of about 30 people, neither expanding nor shrinking. However, the power they possessed was almost more powerful than all the remaining spellcasters combined. As long as the internal conflicts between these 30 people were controlled within a certain range, then no matter how violent the lower-class people were, it was impossible to have any impact on the existing order and the distribution of benefits. Even if more than half of the expeditionary army rebelled, they could still calmly formulate a plan to quell the rebellion bit by bit. It could be said that in their eyes, the only true opponents and enemies were each other. The rest were all tools and chess pieces to be used. However, after the two boys killed one of the counselors in the previous raid, it made everyone completely aware that they had to get rid of this trouble that was enough to threaten their lives. Otherwise, similar things would likely happen again. It was precisely because of this consensus that the counselors, who had been divided into two factions, did not fall out with each other and still maintained their superficial obedience to the chairman. Admiring this group of big shots standing at the top of the pyramid of power and power, the boy gently stroked the behemoth that was lying on the ground like a pet. He grinned and said, "Then let the game begin." As soon as he finished speaking, a huge device used to suppress the geocentric force field immediately began to work under the joint efforts of several counselors. In just the blink of an eye, the force field that was originally everywhere was suppressed to the lowest point. Even every spellcaster could feel the cheers of the magical energy that filled the air. The chairman did not even say a word of nonsense. He raised his hand and shot out thousands of colorful and dazzling light beams. These light beams constantly collided and refracted in the air at an extremely fast speed. Finally, they gathered together and surrounded from all directions like a net. Cage of light. The boy's pupils suddenly constricted. As a child who grew up on the Dalen's mother planet, he had heard the name of this powerful spell before, but did not have the opportunity to obtain the corresponding spell model. This was because this was an exclusive spell. Before the creator voluntarily offered it or died, no one could pry into the mystery behind these magical light beams. Oh, you can actually recognize it. The chairman showed a surprised expression on his face. After all, from the time this spell was invented until now, he had only used it a few times. Even among the counselors, there were not many who had seen it with their own eyes. But now, the boy had accurately identified the name of the spell at first glance, and there was not a trace of hesitation. Of course. Otherwise, why do you think I dare to say such arrogant words as destroying the Dalant civilization? You must know that I'm super serious, and I intend to put it into action to make it a reality. Looking at the net, the boy did not show the slightest bit of panic. Instead, he used alchemy to create a wooden stick to gently touch the gap of the net. Buzz, accompanied was a series of the light of the Dalant. Was the Dalant of the boy to a girl to a day to be. The parts that came into contact with the green light seemed to be stimulated by the outside world. They began to grow rapidly and even sprouted fresh branches and leaves. As for the parts that came into contact with the yellow color, they withered and decayed at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the end, they turned into a foreign object that emitted a pungent smell. Apart from that, there was also the burning of the red light, the electric current of the blue light, the engulfment of the black light, the decomposition of the purple light, and so on. Almost every color of light represented a certain magical attribute or the power of the rules. In the face of such a complicated imprisonment spell, generally speaking, the best choice was to stay still and not make any unnecessary movements. Otherwise, no one knew what would happen if they came into contact with it. What was more terrifying was that every time the two colors of light converged, a brand new color and attribute could be born. Under such a complicated and ever-changing spell model, 99% of people would panic and not be able to find a way to break it. They could only watch helplessly as their range of movement became smaller and smaller, and in the end, they would have no choice but to surrender. But it was a pity that the two boys were not ordinary, especially Luke, who was very sensitive to energy. His two eyes moved continuously on the brilliant net of light. Before anyone realized anything, he raised his hand and shot the magical runes precisely into the nodes one by one. In less than 30 seconds, this powerful spell that gave countless Dalant people headaches began to collapse under the watchful eyes of the public. When the light cage shrunk to 10 meters in size, it suddenly emitted an ear-piercing sound. The next second, with a snap, it shattered into millions of tiny light balls, floating slowly in the air. There was no need to ask to know that these light balls were the energy left behind after the collapse of the spell model. They might even carry some kind of elemental power, but their power was too weak. They were not enough to pose a threat to the truly powerful spellcasters. "You're the baby who disappeared from the mother planet 12 years ago." The speaker stared at Luke's face, which had yet to fade away from its immaturity. His tone was full of undisguised surprise. It was impossible not to be surprised. In order to create this spell, he had spent a total of 30 years. So, from the day it was completed, it had never been broken by an opponent, let alone in such a barbaric way. After all, there were at least 50,000 energy nodes on the light cage. Among them, more than 2,000 occupied the supporting structure. With such a large number, not to mention a spellcaster with a mortal body, even a god with a magical priesthood would have to spend a lot of effort to figure it out. But just now, it took less than 30 seconds to complete the entire process, from analysis to cracking. That's right, I'm the baby who disappeared 12 years ago. Speaking of which, I have to thank you. Otherwise, I might have died in the endless, desolate desert. As thanks, I'll make this feast of destruction as exciting as possible, and make your deaths as meaningful as possible. Luke responded politely. Although he did not show the slightest bit of complacency from beginning to end, his whole body exuded a strong malice that made people shudder. Those who had not personally experienced the destruction of a planet by the Dalan civilization would never understand what it felt like to know that there was no future and no hope from the moment they were sensible. They would never understand the extent to which they could go in order to survive. Chapter 1387. If the boy's feelings toward the Dalant were complicated, then Luke's feelings toward them were pure hatred. There was no need for any reason. Everything he had seen, heard, and experienced while growing up was enough to sustain this hatred for decades, or even centuries. However, hatred was hatred. He knew very well that with his current strength, it was simply a fool's dream to fight this group of old fellows who had participated in countless battles. Therefore, he had always placed himself in a supporting position, putting all his wisdom and energy into defense. Only in this way could he barely establish an isolation zone to ensure that no troublesome things would enter the safe zone. In a battle between spellcasters, the result was usually not a complete reflection of strength. On the contrary, there were countless examples of low-level spellcasters who relied on their wisdom and schemes to unintentionally overturn high-level spellcasters. It could even be said that a mere test could directly determine the outcome of the battle. In such a tense and exciting environment, no one dared to let down their guard. Moreover, the huge monster that was hit by the powerful energy beam but only suffered superficial injuries was still lying on the ground, motionless. Even an idiot would understand that once it moved, the surrounding tunnel of dozens of kilometers would become an undeniably dangerous zone. Any smart spellcaster would not go all out in such a threatening situation. Instead, they would reserve enough strength to deal with any unexpected situations that might occur at any time. Therefore, in the next 10 minutes, no one released any spells that were too powerful. Instead, they kept using spells that targeted the opponent but were very difficult to defend against. They used this to test the opponent's reaction, habits, and way of thinking. This is the strength of the Dalant civilization's most powerful spell caster group, the Congress. The boy skillfully controlled countless arrows made of energy. He pursed his lips and sneered as he attacked the opponent that was several times his size. He could feel that these fellows seemed to be wary of the destructive power of the clay life. No one was willing to take the risk, let alone joke with their lives. It was also because of this that the other party was unable to turn their numbers into an advantage, even though they clearly had an overwhelming advantage. In contrast, the performance of the two boys was just the opposite. One was focused on defense and counterattack, while the other was unleashing his wild imagination to his heart's content, releasing magically modified spell models one after another. Although in principle, These modified spells were not much different from the original ones. However, it was particularly troublesome to defend against. There were a few that could even make experienced counselors battered and exhausted. I have to admit that the speed at which the two of you have grown has indeed surprised everyone. But don't be complacent. According to the current spell resistance, the two of you won't be able to last long, the chairman replied with a gloomy expression. Without a doubt, it was not difficult to tell from his eyes that he was quite dissatisfied with the attitude and performance of the counselors. Unfortunately, strictly speaking, the counselors were not his subordinates. Both sides were equal in terms of function and social status, so he had no right to order them to do anything. Ha ha, who would have thought? You people have always been arrogant and conceited. How could you laugh at the fact that you chose to use a war of attrition and a stalling tactic when you have the absolute advantage? Are you really the gallant people who have conquered countless worlds and claim to be from an advanced civilization? Or have you forgotten what courage is after being in a high position for so long? The boy laughed and continued to mock them. Needless to say, he was trying to infuriate his opponent. To be precise, he was trying to infuriate some of them and make them make stupid judgments when they lose their minds. Only in this way, he had the confidence to let the clay life launch a fatal blow and take care of some of the enemies first. Shut up. We don't need an outsider like you to tell us what to do. A counselor was obviously enraged and couldn't help but refute loudly. No matter what, as a civilization that had enjoyed the benefits of conquest for many years, every gallant people would more or less have a strong sense of superiority and pride in their hearts. When someone stood out to insult or despise the entire civilization, they would naturally be furious and would want to shut the other party's mouth. Outsider? No, no, no. I'm not an outsider. Don't forget, I have a citizenship granted by the Council and have contributed wisdom and strength to the Mother Planet. To a certain extent, I am one of you. It's just that I stand higher than you and see further than you. At the same time, I also expose the true thoughts under your hypocritical mask. Gallant has never been a tolerant civilization. No matter how many powerful bloodlines you have absorbed, how many magical races you have accepted, it is ultimately to seize power from them. You are thieves, liars, cold-blooded, and ruthless plunderers. While saying this, the boy subconsciously looked at a familiar figure not far away. This guy was not just anyone, but his mentor who had taught him countless knowledge and skills, the recently promoted Counselor Orin. The latter obviously noticed this as well. He sighed slightly and said in an extremely complicated tone, "You are right. From the beginning, we have been observing you, using you, trying to figure out where your unparalleled talent and wisdom came from. Sometimes, I really hoped that it would be great if you could become a little more stupid. This way, we can maintain that intimate and harmonious relationship." Intimate and harmonious? My dear mentor, do you know how long I have endured? Do you know how hard it was for me to not show any expression of disgust or disgust, and to pretend that I don't know anything? No, you don't know anything. Since I was 3 years old, I knew that you were a pawn sent by the Council to monitor me. The boy cracked a playful smile. 3 years old. Orin couldn't help but tremble, his large eyes revealing undisguised shock and fear. So, you have been acting all these years? Yes. Just like how you have been hiding your identity, I have also been hiding my true self. I know that every once in a while, you would secretly use a magical tool to test the energy value in my body, and then use that as the basis for your judgment. However, what you don't know is that every time you appear with that magical tool, I will inject the energy in my body into a container that has been secretly prepared. In other words, the data you obtained is only a tenth of my true level. Chapter 1388. Damn it. Be careful. Orin clearly realized something and wanted to warn his companions who were closer to the front. Unfortunately, before he could finish his sentence, a cruel sneer appeared on the boy's face as he inserted a mysterious rune that he had prepared beforehand into the clay puppet's body. The next second, boom, this behemoth, which had been motionless for more than half an hour and would not react even if it was attacked, suddenly rushed out from the depths of the dark tunnel at lightning speed. In the face of the terrifying impact of the thunderbolt, Most of the defensive magic was like a joke as it was instantly shattered into pieces. There were also some counselors who tried to spiritualize themselves to avoid this purely physical attack. However, at the moment of impact, each of them had an expression of disbelief on their faces as they forcibly removed their spiritualized state. Their fragile physical bodies were instantly crushed into meat paste and splattered all over the surrounding walls and the top of their heads. Of course, this level of attack was far from enough to kill a group of powerful spellcasters who had all sorts of life-saving means. In the blink of an eye, those fellows who had died were resurrected once again. However, their faces, without exception, retained the horror that was left behind before they died. Ha ha! How does it feel to be on the verge of death? The boy laughed without restraint. From his laughter, one could clearly feel the madness and brutality. At the same time, the clay life form that had been activated continued to attack the enemy. Due to its rampage, the area within a radius of tens of kilometers had become the center of the terrifying tremors. Accompanied by the loud rumbling, soil and stones above their heads fell like raindrops. Apart from the two boys, there was no one who could guarantee their safety. In an instant, more than half of the counselors chose to temporarily retreat instead of hastily revealing their trump cards without fully understanding the situation. Only the president seemed to have sensed something familiar from the body of this gigantic creature. He widened his eyes and roared in disbelief. The holy text on the pillar of creation? You! How dare you? Oh, you actually recognized these interesting symbols. A hint of surprise flashed in the boy's eyes. Answer my question. How dare you? Have you not read history? Do you not know what these symbols represent? The president's hands began to tremble, slightly uncontrollably. Anger, panic. There was also a little bit of unconcealable fear. The counselors who chose to stay all stared at the nominal supreme leader of the entire civilization in astonishment. They had never seen the president lose his composure like this. He had even abandoned the steady image that he had spent a lot of time and energy building. In addition, some people were trying to figure out what the mysterious symbol that appeared out of thin air was and what the pillar of creation was. The boy seemed to be very happy to see his opponent panicking. He pretended to be nonchalant and replied, of course I know what it represents, as well as the object that is enough to make you tremble and fear from the bottom of your soul. But so what? Just because you're afraid of something doesn't mean I'm afraid of it too. Facing fear head-on was what an expert should do. Running away will only make trouble more troublesome. Idiot, you're playing with fire. This flame will not only devour us, but also you. The president's emotions were clearly a little agitated, and his eyes were full of vigilance as he looked at the clay life form. It was as if this behemoth, without any intelligence, could change into another form at any time. No, you're wrong. Not only will this flame not devour me, but it will also make me stronger, and all of you will become nourishment. Goodbye, dear President and Mentor Orin. I've learned many useful things from all of you. Next, I will launch a general attack on the Expeditionary Army camp. I hope all of you can rush back in time. Otherwise, at this point, the boy deliberately dragged out his words. The meaning of his words was self-evident. Before the other party could react, he controlled the giant clay life form and plunged it into the place where the force field suppression device had been placed. Using that incomparably large mouth, the clay puppet swallowed the little toy in one gulp. It dug a tunnel at an unbelievable speed and disappeared without a trace. Naturally, the two boys also disappeared with it. When the strong tremors had completely disappeared, Orin finally came back to his senses. He shouted with a pale face. He took the force field suppression device away. We can't use teleportation magic now. What? The president instantly realized the severity of the situation. He quickly rushed to the side of the tunnel that had just been dug and found that the suppression device had indeed disappeared. Not good. This is a conspiracy. He purposely exposed his whereabouts to lure us away from the camp. The other council member nodded in agreement. You're right. He tricked us. But what I'm curious about is, how did he know that we would definitely come? What? You suspect? Another council member narrowed his eyes as if he had thought of something. Someone betrayed us. Betrayed the council. Betrayed the entire Dalent civilization. The president straightforwardly revealed the answer to the riddle. Then who do you think this person is? What benefits can he gain by betraying his own race? Orin asked with furrowed brows. Do you even need to ask? Look at the destruction caused by that giant monster, and the holy words that gave it life. Apart from the Shadow Guards, who else would possess such taboo knowledge? The president turned around, a bone-piercing chill flashing through the hole. You mean the Shadow Guards planned all of this? Why? A council member nervously gripped the staff-shaped weapon in his hand. For power, of course. Have you forgotten that those fellows have been trying to expand their influence in the Expeditionary Army recently? Think about it. If they suddenly jumped out during the boys' surprise attack on the Expeditionary Army's camp, what would the ordinary citizens who didn't know the truth think? The president gave an answer without thinking. At this moment, he finally understood why the Shadow Guard were so keen on improving their image. Everything was to lay the foundation for this step. Unfortunately, they couldn't immediately return to the camp, nor could they expose this insidious plan. At the same time, the Shadow Guards were gathered in the Expeditionary Army's camp. The leader didn't even try to hide his burning ambition and desire. He grinned and asked, "My dear brothers and sisters, are you ready to embrace a better future?" Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1389. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, it was accompanied by a deafening sound. A gigantic object broke out of the ground that had been reinforced by magic. Before anyone could react, it quickly swept through everything within a few thousand meters. Whether it was the temporary buildings made of stone and magic clay, or the special buildings covered by layers of protective spells, all of them were turned into piles of rubble without exception. In this underground world filled with powerful force fields, nothing could resist gravity, whether it was natural forces or supernatural forces. Relying on the control of gravity around its body that it had recently mastered, the clay life form easily destroyed the suppression devices around the camp of the Expeditionary Army. When the suppressed force field was released in an instant, everything that the Dalent people had built with magic as the foundation collapsed completely in a short 10 minutes. Some of the unlucky ones even triggered a terrifying backlash. They screamed as their bodies turned into balls of fire, frost, lightning, or other forms. In the end, they breathed their last in pain. Appreciating the chaos, panic, and despair in front of him, Luke pursed his lips and said with a slightly sarcastic tone, "Do you see, my dear brother? These are the Dalent people, a civilization built on absolute power, rich knowledge, and arrogance. Perhaps they usually act insufferably arrogant, but once they encounter an enemy stronger than them, their performance is actually no different from other civilizations." Difference? What difference do you want? Don't forget, although the Expeditionary Army is considered the elite force of the Dalent people, most of them are at the bottom of the pyramid. No matter what social system it is, the people at the bottom are always the most foolish, the most easily swayed and controlled group. In my opinion, the true carrier of civilization is actually the small group of elites at the top of the pyramid. Only their actions, thoughts, and consciousness can determine the upper and lower limits of a civilization. The boy turned his head, his eyes flashing with a meaningful light. There was no doubt that even though they were brothers who originated from the same spirit and consciousness, the two of them had different perceptions and values because of the environment they grew up in. As the boy who had received Dalent's education, he clearly believed that the elites at the top were the true essence of a civilization. As for the ordinary citizens who lived at the bottom, they were at best cannon fodder or tools for the elites to consume. No matter how many were killed or injured, as long as the elites were still alive, the entire civilization would quickly recover, or even become stronger. On the other hand, if all the elites of a civilization were to die, the entire civilization would not be far from disappearing. No matter how large the remaining population was, it was meaningless. This was because the entire civilization would eventually fall into chaos, collapse, and even perish due to the lack of elite's foresight, management, and planning. No, my opinion is just the opposite of yours. Civilization is an abstract concept, a general term that combines knowledge, technology, culture, ideas, and complex emotions. Most of the time, the people that you see as meaningless are the most important carriers of the latter half. If the gap between the upper and lower levels was too great, then the civilization would become extremely fragile. Even though he now possessed unparalleled power, he could not withstand any failure. A truly mature and excellent civilization should be able to rise from the ashes after multiple catastrophic failures. Luke did not back down and expressed his opinion. It had to be said that the two of them stood in the middle of the ruins, listening to the endless screams and wails around them, and then seriously discussing the essence of the empty word civilization. It was truly ironic. Universe Listening Book Network. But what was more interesting was that the members of the Shadow Guard were clearly nearby, but they allowed the giant clay life form to destroy, slaughter, and destroy everything in the camp. This situation lasted for an entire hour. When more than half of the large expeditionary army had been killed or injured, and countless people waited in despair for the higher-ups to stand up against this powerful monster, the Shadow Guards finally made their appearance. Without any hesitation, they relied on their familiarity with the divine text of the Pillar of Creation to easily restrict the clay puppet to a specific area, unable to move. Then, the leader swaggered to the front of the two boys and roared angrily. "Who gave you the guts to do this? How dare you behave so atrociously here? Huh? What's wrong? Have all the self-proclaimed guardians gone into hiding? They actually let a few old fellows who have been forgotten by history come out and make a fool of themselves." The boy deliberately pretended not to know the leader and sneered sarcastically. Protecting the Dalent civilization is not only the responsibility of the Council. It is the responsibility of each and every one of us Dalent. What's more, do you think that the Council is the only powerful spellcaster group we have? No. The Shadow Guards are the ultimate guardians who have been hiding in the shadows for thousands of years and silently sacrificing everything. With that, the leader's entire body released a black, ink-like substance. In the blink of an eye, it enveloped the surrounding hundreds of meters. When the entire huge sphere was completely closed, he shed his fake expression and said with a smile, "Ah, you're finally here. Did you know? I've been waiting for these days, waiting for the day our plan succeeds. It's our honor to be able to cooperate with such an ambitious powerhouse like you." The boy also changed his sarcastic tone and bowed slightly. Perhaps the expeditionary army outside would never know that the enemies who were tit for tat just now were actually in cahoots. "So, are you ready?" The leader did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. The boy and Luke looked at each other and immediately shook their heads lightly. "No, not us but me. My brother won't go back with you. He has something more important to deal with." "Something more important?" "This is different from what we discussed before." The leader of the Shadow Guards frowned subconsciously. As an old monster who had relied on some kind of power to survive for thousands of years, he hated sudden changes that were out of his control the most. One had to know that bringing both boys back and bringing only one back was a completely different achievement. Chapter 1390. The leader of the Shadow Guards stared into the boy's black eyes. After a full minute, he asked, "Why one?" "This is different from what we agreed on. Because everyone lives for themselves, driven by their insatiable ambitions and desires. Even though to a certain extent we share the same goals and interests, but that is not all." Even though the boy had maintained a good demeanor from the beginning to the end, the words that came out of his mouth were not at all reassuring. After all, he had proven his destructive power more than once, so no matter what he was planning, no one would let their guard down. "What if I insist on keeping both of you here?" The leader of the Shadow Guards lowered his voice and threatened. The boy smiled and shrugged. "Then I can only say sorry to the pitiful expeditionary army outside. At most, they will all die in a minute. Maybe you and your men can keep one of us, but the price is to be responsible for the disastrous consequences. Think about it. Once the expeditionary army is completely destroyed, What right do you have to bargain with the council? Not to mention seizing that mysterious magical item? Threats were always built on the premise that both sides were not on equal footing. Now, it was the Shadow Guards that needed him, but he did not necessarily need them. Even if there was a threat, he should be the one to threaten them. The leader lowered his head and pondered for a moment. In the end, he could not help but reveal a helpless expression. It seems that I don't have any room to bargain, do I? That's right. In return, we will cooperate with you to put on this show so that no one can say anything. The boy, who had an extraordinary understanding of the workings of the mind, did not choose to push his luck. Instead, he threw out a bait. He understood that in the hearts of these old fellows who had been suppressed for thousands of years, there was nothing more important than regaining their rights and freedom. Otherwise, as long as they did not destroy the magical device, they would be forced to obey the council's orders, no matter how ridiculous, dangerous, or fatal those orders were. All right, we'll do as you say. Even though the leader's face was a little ugly, he still nodded and agreed. As the last word left his mouth, the black, unknown substance that shrouded above and below his feet quickly shrank towards the center. The moment it was about to touch the people inside, it suddenly exploded in all directions. Bang! After a muffled sound, the unknown black substance scattered in all directions like raindrops. Anything that came into contact with it, no matter what it was, would be devoured, disintegrated, and fused at a speed that was difficult to discern with the naked eye. Finally, a huge black pond appeared beneath his feet. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. A large number of bubbles rose from the bottom, each of them carrying an astonishing amount of energy. When they collided with each other, they immediately caused a terrifying spatial collapse, trapping everything around them. I told you, you can't run away. The leader of the Shadow Guards once again entered his best actor mode and focused on playing the role of the hero who turned the situation around. The other guys around him didn't stay idle either. They began to attack Luke, who was standing at the side. All of a sudden, both sides used all kinds of gorgeous, strange, and terrifying techniques, but none of them were truly threatening. Even those dangerous situations were put on a show under the premise that both sides maintained a tacit understanding. It was just that this show was so realistic and vivid. In addition, the other people in the camp had just experienced an unprecedented catastrophe, so no one could tell. Just like the saying went, an actor who didn't understand the audience's inner expectations and desires would never become a truly perfect actor. Unfortunately, whether it was the two boys or the members of the Shadow Guards, they were all top-notch actors. In addition, the power they used was the symbol on the stone pillar. Ordinary Dalent people couldn't understand it at all. Perhaps some people who had come into contact with the essence of power could barely feel a trace of inexplicable familiarity or even resonance from these symbols. However, these resonances were too weak to trigger the hidden things in their bloodline. Enough. It's time for all of this to come to an end. No one can be presumptuous in front of the glorious and great Dalent civilization. You must pay the price for your actions. The leader of the Shadow Guards secretly gave a look and suddenly stopped all attacks. His entire body began to slowly sink into the black pond that had a diameter of about 200 meters. First, it was his feet, followed by his legs, waist, upper body, and finally his head was no exception. When his body completely disappeared, the bubbles that were coming out suddenly disappeared and were replaced by a terrifying silence. The next second, boom, a huge wave soared into the sky and directly wrapped the boy tightly. The more he struggled, the tighter the sticky black substance wrapped around him. Finally, it shrank bit by bit and formed an unbreakable seal. Damn it, don't worry about me. Run. Realizing that he couldn't break free, the boy immediately turned around and shouted at his brother. Hold on, I will find a way to come back and save you. Luke pretended to be nervous and quickly broke away from the entanglement of the other Shadow Guards. He rushed to the clay life-form side and broke free from its restraints with lightning speed. He then directly opened a large hole in the ground and fled. However, the leader didn't seem to have any intention of chasing him. Instead, he sneered and asked the boy, who had already become a captive, I believe that with your intelligence, you should know what kind of treatment you will receive next, right? Unfortunately, I'm afraid you can't do anything to me, because in my hand, I have a pardon statement signed by the council. In other words, no matter what I did, according to the ancient tradition and law, I'm innocent. The boy grinned and revealed a sarcastic smile. What? Pardon? How could the council grant a pardon to such a vicious criminal like you? The leader roared in shock. From the expression on his face, no one would have guessed that he was the one who had asked for the pardon declaration from the chairman. But now, this statement was used as a tool to attack the council's prestige. Even a small number of gallant people who were angered to the point of losing their minds after hearing this news began to awaken the most primitive bloodline power in their bodies. A large amount of black substance quickly flowed out of these people's pores and finally slowly gathered together. Chapter 1391. Ba thump, ba thump, ba thump. Along with a strong heartbeat, every Dalent who had an unknown black substance flowing out of their pores felt that they were connected to an indescribably powerful life form. However, this life form seemed to be in a dormant state. No matter how they tried to wake it up, they did not get any response. However, due to the Dalent's innate sensitivity to energy, they could clearly sense that this power that did not belong to any known magic was slowly flowing towards the powerful life form. What is going on? A warrior struggled to get up from the ground and stared at his hands that were completely wrapped in the black substance. There was no doubt that he had given up on becoming a spellcaster with a higher social status because of his lack of talent. But now he found that he actually had another kind of talent, and it was far superior to the others around him. This is power, the primordial power that lies in the blood of each of us Darentes. In the distant era of theocracy, it dispelled barbarism and ignorance and brought us the first dawn of civilization. At the same time, it helped us defeat one enemy after another and became the undisputed ruler of the mother planet. But unfortunately, because of the war with the gods, the council thought that this power was dangerous, so it was completely banned. A member of the Shadow Guards explained selectively. Banned? Damn it. Why is it banned? The warrior immediately could not help but curse. Not only him. Many expeditionary army members who were forced to become warriors began to gnash their teeth and vent their strong dissatisfaction deep in their hearts. After all, this kind of thing that destroyed the future of others, no matter who it was, would be angry or crazy. One must know that spellcasters and non-spellcasters, in the clear social hierarchy of the Dalent, could be said to be heaven and earth. Especially the warriors who were always at the front line, they were always cannon fodder used for consumption and sacrifice. Every time they launched a war, the casualties were dozens or even hundreds of times more than the spellcasters. On the contrary, not only could the spellcasters enjoy all kinds of privileges, but they were also often protected in battle. Unless there was a major error in intelligence and judgment, it was impossible for a large number of spellcasters to die. In fact, within the expeditionary army, the conflict between spellcasters and warriors was already quite acute. Sometimes, warriors would even choose to stay behind and carry out suicide missions in order to buy time for spellcasters to retreat. However, under the powerful inertia of tradition, most people mistakenly viewed this contradiction as a kind of jealousy of those without talent towards those with talent. But now, an ancient power had broken the originally clear class boundaries. It turned out that magic was not the only power that the Dalent people could obtain. There was another power that could rival or even surpass it. As philosophers often said, the most terrible thing in the world was never cruel exploitation and oppression. Instead, it was a source of turmoil called hope. Because hope would break the existing order and make every citizen who was willing to live at the bottom of society realize that their fate could be changed. If the foundation of the pyramid-shaped ruling structure was shaken, then the collapse of the upper structure was inevitable. There was no doubt that in this conspiracy, the Shadow Guards had chosen those at the bottom who had been treated unfairly for a long time, and not the spellcasters who had vested interests. After all, The former had enough reason and motivation to go against the council, while the latter had already obtained everything. There was no need to risk ruining their beautiful future by offending the highest authority of the entire civilization. In order to further provoke the expeditionary army's extremely sensitive nerves, the leader of the Shadow Guards even found a black slate that was personally authorized by the council speaker from the boy's body and displayed the pardon written on it in front of everyone. Under such ferocious attacks one after another, not to mention a group of people who had long been dissatisfied and tired of war, even an ordinary Dalent person couldn't help but start to doubt if the council really had a problem and could no longer lead the entire civilization forward. Comrades, I believe that you've seen the ironclad evidence. This time, the council's performance has been too disappointing. We must think of a way to restrict and monitor their power to prevent a similar tragedy from happening again. The leader of the Shadow Guards loudly called out in a righteous manner. In particular, the warriors who had awakened the power of Shadow were given special attention by him. In his eyes, these people who had the same power were his people in the true sense. Even if it was to preserve their power, it was inevitable that there would be intense friction with the council. As for whether this method of popularizing the power of Shadow would awaken the god who had slumbered for thousands of years, he didn't care at all. After all, to a certain extent, the Shadow Guard situation couldn't be worse. Even if they returned to the era of divine authority, they would still be better off than now. That's right. The council's power must be restricted. They're the real traitors. I support the Shadow Guards to stand up and monitor the council. And the council's speaker, he who signed the pardon, must hand over his power and step down. For a moment, the air above the ruined camp was filled with angry and dissatisfied shouts. Admiring the angry and sorrowful faces, the leader slightly raised the corner of his mouth and revealed a smug smile. He understood that at this stage of the plan, the council would have to make corresponding compromises, whether they were willing or not. Unless the council speaker went completely crazy and killed the entire expeditionary force on this planet. Of course, the probability of this happening was so small that it was negligible. Even if the council speaker really went crazy, the council members would work together to stop his crazy behavior. Population, especially elites who had received professional training, was very precious in any civilization. If this expeditionary force was completely wiped out, not only would the council member have to face the anger of the people on the mother planet, but they would also have to give up countless worlds that they had already occupied and begun to plunder resources. Congratulations. It seems that you've already gotten what you want, isn't it? The boy raised his head and stared into the other's eyes that were almost filled with ambition and desire. This is all thanks to your cooperation. Don't worry, when the council member comes back, I'll give you the things you want. Chapter 1392. There was no doubt that the Shadow Guard's instigation of the expeditionary army was very successful, so much so that the situation was already out of control when the chairman rushed back with the counselors. They didn't even have time to explain anything to the angry crowd and were forced to summon the members of the Shadow Guards, as well as the boy they captured. I think I need an explanation. Listening to the questioning and cursing outside the temporary building, the chairman narrowed his eyes and stared at these people who had a completely different attitude from before. He clutched the magical item tightly in his hand, as if he could fall out with them at any time. But that wasn't surprising. After all, the Shadow Guards really went overboard this time. They could even be described as heart-wrenching. But regrettably, apart from the pardon statement that he signed himself, he didn't have anything to use against them. The leader of the Shadow Guards obviously sensed the anger in the chairman's heart and responded with a smile. No, I don't think I need to explain anything. After all, you were the one who broke your promise first, and we were only forced to do something. Please remember that the Shadow Guards are not an appendage of the Council, but an organization that is independent of the authority. Please don't treat us as your subordinates or slaves, and don't try to play us like fools. Break my promise? Are you saying that I didn't give you enough time to let the expeditionary army cross the portal in advance? The chairman's pupils suddenly shrank. That's right. It was from this moment that I realized that you and the council didn't intend to keep your promise. So we have to rely on ourselves to protect the part that we deserve. Now, I followed your request and brought this boy back alive. Next, you should fulfill your promise. The leader didn't have the slightest intention of hiding and openly spoke of the desire in his heart. In fact, at this stage of the plan, there was no way to continue hiding most of it, so he might as well just admit it directly. This was the only way to cover up the last and most important part of the story. Oomph. Don't tell me you really want the Shadow Guards to become supervisors? Moreover, you violated the taboo of the Shadow Guards for thousands of years and reawakened the power of the Shadow in the tribe. Just based on this point, I can get rid of you and choose a new batch of people to inherit the name and functions of the Shadow Guards. The chairman grinned and revealed a chilling sneer. If the other party dared to reveal even the slightest bit of such a tendency, he would definitely launch a great purge without mercy. In the eyes of the strict upper echelons of the Dalent, if something really threatened the foundation of the entire civilization, a bloody purge was not unacceptable. One had to know that after the battle with the gods, they had killed all their compatriots who were unwilling to give up the power of the shadows. It was also because of this cruel purge that the foundation of the glorious magic civilization was laid. Sometimes, turmoil and slaughter were not necessarily bad things for civilization. On the contrary, when old things were destroyed, new things would sprout and grow at an extremely fast speed. The leader of the Shadow Guards clearly sensed the strong malice in the other party's eyes. He pretended to be relaxed and shook his head. No, of course not. I'm not that naive. My siblings and I only wanted our share of it. As for those fellows outside who have awakened the power of darkness, you can do whatever you want with them. Really? The speaker leaned forward slightly, as if he was trying to confirm the authenticity of his words. Really? I've never wanted to encroach on the rights of the council. I just want to return to the group and not stay in that smelly, dark, and cold abandoned temple. You've never lived there, so you'll never understand the indescribable pain. When he said this, every member of the Shadow Guards had a look of hatred on their faces. Most normal people who lived in a completely enclosed environment for a few hours or even a few days would develop severe psychological trauma and even mental illness, let alone thousands of years. However, the speaker obviously did not believe it so easily. He kept looking at the eyes of the Shadow Guards. After a full minute, he relaxed a little and said with a slightly tired voice, "Since that's all you want, I can fulfill your request. But there's one thing you have to do. You have to deal with the expeditionary forces outside and make sure they accept the council's leadership and orders." "No problem. We'll deal with the trouble we caused ourselves." "That's fair." The leader of the Shadow Guards agreed without hesitation. After all, this matter was exactly what he wanted. Not only could he take the opportunity to gather a group of talented fellows and quietly expand the influence of the Shadow Guards, but he could also get his hands on the army and even rope in a few high-ranking officers. "Very good. Here, these are your new identities. Remember, don't play similar tricks a second time. My patience is limited." After saying this, the speaker threw a few slates that recorded the new identities on the table and waved his hand, indicating that they could leave. When all the members of the Shadow Guards had left, he turned his gaze to the trapped boy and asked with a cold face, "How is it? Are you starting to regret your foolish actions now? You could have used another gentle method to integrate into this glorious and great civilization, but you chose the most intense method." "Regret? Why should I regret? Besides, you didn't even deal with the masterminds. How can you bear to deal with me, your collaborator?" The boy replied with a smile. From that relaxed and happy face, there was no awareness that a captive should have. On the contrary, it was as if in his eyes, this was just a game that could end without paying any price. The speaker laughed disdainfully. "Humph. You think I don't know that those bastards are secretly passing information to you? No, I know, and I know no less than you. It's just that I didn't expose them and chose to compromise. Because the Dalent civilization will need to devote all their energy to the research of your bloodline for a long time. During this time, the Council can't spare too many people to maintain the huge conquest system and their temporary replacements. When the research is over, no matter what they do during this time, they will eventually become insignificant dust in a long history. Chapter 1393. There was no doubt that politics was the art of compromise. In any organization or even civilization, there are all kinds of contradictions and conflicts of interest within it without exception. As the supreme ruler, what he had to do was not to intensify the contradictions, nor to directly carry out a great purge without asking any questions. He had to kill all those who disagreed with him, leaving only one voice and one will. Generally speaking, those who did this would not end well in the end. Even if they succeeded, they were destined to become the target of countless people's curses. Although the Dalent civilization was an oligarchic political group composed of a few powerful spellcasters, and the president had considerable power, he could not do whatever he wanted. Therefore, on the way back, he discussed with the other senators and decided to first stabilize the shadow guards instead of directly using the powerful magic tool. In this way, not only could they greatly reduce the political risk, but they could also make use of the waste and let the shadow guards settle the planets that needed to be reconquered, ensuring that various resources could be continuously transported back to the mother planet. Of course, the most important premise was that they had to abide by the agreement and capture the defected boy alive. For this reason, it was not impossible to temporarily compromise a little. On the second day after the boy was brought back to the mother planet alive, the expedition with the largest scale of mobilization in the history of the Dalent civilization, which was also the expedition with the most losses, finally came to an end. The members of the ravaged expeditionary army did not even have time to recover before they were scattered and sent to one world after another to carry out missions. Especially those who had awakened the power of shadow, they did not know what a tragic fate awaited them. To some extent, they were equivalent to being exiled in disguise. They would never be able to return to the mother planet for the rest of their lives, and even their contact with the outside world would be cut off. Only a very small number of them returned to the mother planet with the shadow guards as chess pieces to sow discord and divide the organization. After all, humans were alive for the endless struggle, battles with the environment, with the enemy, with colleagues, and even with their own brothers, sisters, and parents. Any so-called family, friendship, and love seemed so pale and ridiculous in the face of this ubiquitous battle. The president believed that as long as the new generation of Dalent people who mastered the power of shadow grew up, the shadow guards would be filled with all kinds of different voices and even factions. By then, he could rely on the powerful strength of the Senate and skilled political skills to play the other party in the palm of his hand. Perhaps the shadow guards, which had been a headache for the previous speakers, would be completely eliminated in this generation. Unfortunately, just as the chairman was about to cast a long line to catch a big fish, he didn't realize that the members of the shadow guards didn't want to fight a protracted battle at all. On the contrary, what they wanted to do was to get rid of the parliament and restore their supreme position in the era of theocracy. And the most crucial part of this plan had been sent into the enemy's castle. His heartbeat is normal. Spiritual fluctuations normal. The energy in his body is at normal levels. All life signs are normal. The 94th experiment will now begin. Accompanied by a series of tense and serious voices, the boy who was soaked in a container filled with light blue liquid yawned in boredom and allowed a tube to be inserted into his wrist. In less than a minute, the fresh blood flowed into the body of another clone that looked exactly the same. In the next second, the clone, which was as pale as a dead person, suddenly opened its eyes and hit the wall of the container crazily. Each hit was harder and crazier than the last. In the end, he smashed the hard skull into pieces. Red and white brain matter slowly slid down the translucent container. There was no need to ask to know that this clone couldn't be any more dead. Looking at the corpse floating in the container, the chairman subconsciously frowned and muttered to himself, "Damn it. What's the problem? Why can't it be cloned? Soul? No, it's not the soul. Sir, do you think you could take a break first? Some of the experimental personnel have been working for more than 200 hours. If this continues, they won't be able to take it," an assistant cautiously reminded. Ever since this project, named Evolution, began, the entire upper class of the Dalant civilization fell into a state of madness. Because the more they delved into the boy's body, the more they discovered that there were countless secrets hidden in it that they had never discovered before. Especially the core of the cell. It seemed to be able to divide endlessly and never reach its limit. It was also not like the cells of other life forms, aging and dying with the passage of time. This also meant that as long as they figured out the secrets, they could obtain a near-eternal life. Eternal life. What an unbelievable word. Even in this highly developed, magical civilization, it was a treasure that made everyone's breath quicken and heartbeat faster. After all, this method of eternal life did not require one to change one's life form, nor did one have to bear heavy shackles and responsibilities like a god. Yes, let everyone rest for 2 days. It just so happens that I need some time to adjust my thoughts. After 2 days, the experiment will continue. Remember, everything that happens here must not be revealed to the outside world. Otherwise, I will make the person who leaked the secret suffer a fate worse than death. Do you understand? The chairman warned with a serious face. Understood. Please rest assured. The assistant quickly nodded. He was a fool and understood what the experiment here meant. Without saying anything, he turned around and disappeared at the end of the corridor. After all the tired staff left, the chairman came to the boy and gently knocked on the hard container's shell. Hey, wake up. I have a few questions for you. What do you want to ask? The boy, who was resting with his eyes closed, slowly opened his eyes. There was a cynical smile on his face. Just as he expected, although he lost his freedom and became some kind of research object, these Dalant people did not make things difficult for him at all. In order to prevent suicide, he was even given about 2 hours of free time every day. Of course, the premise was that he had to maintain good cooperation and interaction during the experiment. It had to be said that for a murderer and sinner who had caused a tragedy on the mother planet not long ago, killing a counselor and slaughtering half of the expeditionary army, this kind of treatment could be described as generous. Sometimes the boy really wanted to know how the ordinary Dalant people outside would react after knowing the inside story. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1394. Actually, I've always been very curious. How did you manage to maintain your sense of self in the midst of countless knowledge and thoughts without being devoured by a huge civilization? The chairman obviously did not intend to beat around the bush and directly raise the question that had been bothering him. According to his original plan, a newborn baby should be like a piece of white paper that he could leave his mark on as a Dalant. In fact, in the long history of the Dalant civilization, there were countless examples of adopting and accommodating the children of other magical races. However, there had never been a case like this boy who had maintained his absolute sense of self from the beginning to the end, unless he developed some kind of strong desire and emotion from the inside out. There was no external factor that could affect his mind and soul. Devour? That's a very good word. The boy changed his posture in the jar filled with solution and replied with a smile. Indeed, in front of a huge civilization, I seem so small and laughable. I can even be described as lowly. Normally speaking, when the gap between civilizations reached a certain extent, the residents of a low-leveled civilization would inevitably have a strong desire to become a member of a high-leveled civilization, even if the high-leveled civilization had done some bloody and cruel massacres to them, and even their own compatriots. But what if it's the other way around? Will the residents of a higher civilization be attracted by the backward knowledge, technology, and living environment of a lower civilization? No, they won't. They will only think that the actions of these lower civilizations are stupid and laughable. So, in the eyes of you and your brother, the Dalant civilization is only a lower civilization? The chairman narrowed his eyes as if he did not believe the hint in the boy's words. Because in the known space, the Dalant people had never encountered a civilization that could be compared to them, let alone a powerful civilization that surpassed them. Otherwise, with their actions, they would have been cruelly suppressed by more advanced civilizations long ago. It was just like when the Dalent people discovered that a civilization had amazing potential and would create great resistance or trouble for them in the future. They would not hesitate to use everything they had to wipe out this civilization once and for all. Or they would create an unprecedented disaster and set it back hundreds or even thousands of years. The boy first nodded and then shook his head. You can say yes, but you can also say no. It is true that you are a highly developed magic civilization with unbelievable technology and strength. But what was inconceivable was that behind this highly developed society, there was actually an extremely immature and unhealthy social system. Here, the status of spellcasters was infinitely elevated. Those normies could only be forced to submit to spellcasters in order to find their own place in society and groups. To put it simply, it was the solidification of the social hierarchy. Once the lower-class citizens have their talent confirmed, they will forever lose the chance to change their fate. We are a civilization based on magic. Is there a problem with spellcasters having a high status? Isn't it because of this preferential treatment of spellcasters that the Dalent civilization could achieve its glorious achievements today? The president frowned and questioned. Obviously, he didn't think there was anything wrong with this. In fact, he was the beneficiary of this unequal system. You're right. The glory of the Dalent civilization today is inseparable from this system where large amounts of resources are tilted towards spellcasters. But don't forget that the most important things for a civilization are not only knowledge, technology, and strength, but also the abstract parts such as ideology and culture. Think about it. Since the Durant civilization had existed until now, what famous literary works did it have? Or great masters of art that can be passed down for generations? The boy asked with a faint smile. We don't need those boring things at all. The president didn't hide his disdain at all. Just as he had shown, most Dalent people were 100% pragmatists. They had no interest in things like art, philosophy, and culture at all. In fact, although there were a small number of people who were engaged in such work within the hierarchical society, their status was even lower than the most ordinary expeditionary army soldiers. See, this is where the problem lies. The boy shrugged. May I ask, if your civilization encountered an unprecedented disaster, and all the accumulated knowledge, technology, and elites were destroyed overnight, then what could support the survivors to rise again and continue the glory of the entire civilization? There was no doubt that this question made the president fall into deep thought for a long time. This was because the development of the Dalent civilization was not smooth sailing. Instead, it had experienced a real catastrophe. After the war with God, it was the power of faith that supported them to find a new direction of development. It was the current magic system. No guesses. It was faith. It was those who once madly worshipped and were obsessed with God that launched this unprecedented cruel war. Then they took the initiative to give up the powerful strength that they were once proud of, just so that the dying civilization could be reborn from the ashes. But now, the Dalent people had lost their faith. They were only left with an endless thirst for knowledge and strength. If the civilization suffered a heavy blow at this time, then the most likely thing to happen was definitely not to unite to fight against the disaster. On the contrary, the expeditionary army that had spread to various conquered worlds would definitely take the opportunity to break away from the control of their mother planet. They would either choose to be independent or unite to conquer each other. Even if there was a victor in the end, the Dalent civilization would certainly not be able to recover to its heyday. After a long silence, the president finally took a deep breath and sighed with a slightly self-deprecating tone. So you don't agree with us not because our knowledge is not rich enough, our technology is not advanced enough, and our strength is not strong enough, but because we are not mature enough. We can't be like a real mature civilization that can stand up again no matter how many disasters we experience. Also, did you think of all this yourself? No. The latter part is the idea of my brother. As he spoke, the boy glanced at the magical item that the president always carried with him from the corner of his eye. He could feel that this small accessory contained an extremely shocking amount of energy but it would not have any effect on most magic users. There was no need to ask to know that this was the thing that the Shadow Guards dreamed of getting, the weapon that could easily kill them. Chapter 1395. After the short conversation ended, the boy's days once again returned to his daily experiments. Since he did not attempt to escape or cause any damage during the entire process, the Dalent people gradually relaxed their vigilance. Although they had not yet come into contact with the more than 10,000 anti-magic circles on his body, they no longer restricted him from moving freely within a fixed range. However, those guards did not know that all of his disguises were for one thing, and that was to obtain the magical equipment carried by the chairman. For this, he even allowed the experimenters to extract his genetic inheritance and then gave it to the female descendants of the members of the parliament. He intended to cultivate a large number of mixed-race descendants and then manually screen and eliminate them. In the end, only those with no defects and strong talents would be retained and slowly integrate into the upper class of the Dalent. Unfortunately, these guys who were full of ambition and desire did not understand that no matter how many times they tried, they would never succeed. Because as a reincarnator, the boy was destined to surpass most of the life in the material universe from the moment he was born, so his genetic inheritance had an unimaginable reproductive isolation. Not to mention the Dalent civilization, which was still in the position of mortals. Even if the gods came, they would not be able to come up with a good solution. How is it? Is there any progress in the experiment? The boy stood in front of a translucent container and stared at the clone that was exactly the same as him, but the chest and brain were dissected. Normally, when a person saw a life that was exactly the same as him, he would involuntarily feel a strong sense of fear, let alone a half-dissected corpse. However, not only did he not have the slightest bit of fear, but he was also casually eating snacks. Sorry, there is no new progress for the time being. However, the experiment the day before yesterday found an interesting phenomenon. That is, when trying to give the clone a soul, their brain will produce a large amount of information feedback. There are 2 research teams working day and night to decipher all the feedback information. The chairman believes that these information centers hide a huge secret. The male researcher Dalent explained without turning his head. Feedback information? I see. The boy pursed his lips and revealed a playful smile. But soon, he returned to his usual careless appearance and slowly continued to walk along the corridor. The busy researcher did not notice that the moment he left, the red light on the complicated instrument behind him flashed continuously, but returned to normal after about 2 to 3 seconds. In fact, it was not only this clone. Everywhere he walked in the laboratory, all the clones trembled slightly uncontrollably. Some even opened pairs of black eyes that were as deep as the abyss. After a while, they quickly closed their eyes and returned to a state of deep sleep. About 2 or 3 days later, when the president and several senators came to the secret laboratory again to conduct an important experiment, the boy who was soaking in the container suddenly raised his head and asked meaningfully, "Do you know what the stupidest thing in the world is?" What do you mean? The chairman suddenly had a very bad premonition. It's the literal meaning. Do you know why there are no signs of life feedback? The answer is actually, as the voice. All the clones in the hundreds of culture tanks in the laboratory, including the dismembered and dismembered parts, opened their eyes at the same time. They grinned and said, "Because I am their consciousness, and I'm their soul. Every clone you create is equivalent to my doppelganger." Damn it. Quick, cut it off. One of the researchers seemed to have realized something. He rushed madly to the device that was responsible for providing energy to the culture tanks, as if he was going to press the most obvious red button on it. But unfortunately, he was still one step too late. Just as he was about to reach the device, an energy storm like a tsunami swept through every corner of the laboratory. Boom, boom, boom. A large number of precious and sensitive instruments exploded violently under the baptism of the storm. The most violent explosion was undoubtedly near the chairman's position. In order to withstand the flames, shockwaves, and deafening explosions, he had no choice but to activate a large number of defensive spells. However, he was still forced to retreat. Many of his belongings fell from the impact, including the magical weapon that was used to deal with the shadow guards. When the energy storm gradually dissipated, naked boys walked out of the translucent broken containers one by one. Each of them was emitting a shocking amount of energy. "Oh, my God, he's right, we're so stupid." One of the counselors widened his eyes, his body trembling involuntarily. Although the clones in front of him were not as powerful as the boy himself, under the control of his consciousness, the destructive power that burst out in a short period of time was definitely enough to make all the Durantians present suffer. "Seal the laboratory. Immediately. Immediately. Also, activate the highest level of defensive measures. No matter what, we can't let him escape." The chairman gave the order with a gloomy expression. Understood. Activate defensive measures. Seal the entire laboratory. Level 1 defensive measures activated. The crisis team will arrive at the scene of the accident in 3 minutes. Quarantine and blockade protocol activated. Magic interruption activated. All exits have been sealed. Following a series of announcements, the huge underground laboratory began to enter a state of emergency. Various emergency measures were activated one after another. In the blink of an eye, the battle had begun in the core area. There was no hesitation. Both sides brought out their trump cards from the very beginning. They did not care if the laboratory would be destroyed in the intense battle. All kinds of powerful spells were cast one after another. This was especially so for the clone army. They did not care whether they would be injured or die. Even if their magic was exhausted, they would still self-destruct to inflict heavy damage on the enemy. In just a few minutes, the defensive line that was organized by the chairman and counselors collapsed. If it were not for the large number of puppets and combatants that came later, it was estimated that at least 2 of the counselors would have died on the spot. When they finally stabilized their position, they suddenly realized that the boy's original body had picked up the magical item that had fallen on the ground. He mocked in a sarcastic tone, "Sorry, I've already gotten what I wanted. Why don't you guess why I tried so hard to get it?" Chapter 1396. You planned all of this. The chairman stared at the familiar item, and his face instantly turned ugly. In the face of absolute power, the shadow guards were actually not very afraid of the Parliament. On the contrary, no matter how resentful and dissatisfied they were, they still obeyed the orders issued by the Parliament. The most fundamental reason was that this weapon was jointly created by several of the most powerful Dalent people in the era of theocracy at the cost of their own lives. Once this weapon was activated, all users of shadow power within the effective supply range would suffer a strong backlash. Unless someone's attainment in shadow power could surpass its creator, otherwise, they could only obediently wait for death to befall them. Unfortunately, since the complete ban on the spread of shadow power, the members of the Shadow Guards could not even bypass the few ancestors who were willing to sacrifice themselves, let alone explore the source of this power in depth. Therefore, although this weapon had never been used in a real sense since it was completed, it was a symbol of the Parliament and the President's power. In addition, recently, the Shadow Guards had stepped out from behind the scenes and had a wide influence among the people. Some young people even worshipped and imitated them as heroes. At the same time, the shadow power that was almost on the verge of extinction began to once again revive in certain special groups. It could be said that if this weapon fell into the hands of the Shadow Guards, or was destroyed, then it was equivalent to deeply planting the seeds of a civil war within the Dalent civilization. Sooner or later, the conflict would completely erupt and evolve into a cruel war for dominance. That's right. In fact, the reason why I'm willing to become a captive and let you do whatever you want is to get this little thing. Because this involves a secret deal, I can use it to exchange for the secrets I want. After saying that, the boy did not give the other party any time to react and directly disappeared behind the countless clones. The next second, these clones that did not care about their own lives under the control of his consciousness began to frantically destroy everything in the laboratory as if they had gone mad. In less than a few minutes, not a single intact equipment could be found in the large laboratory. Traces left behind after the explosion were everywhere, and there were even lava gurgling out of some places. As for the emergency team that arrived later, they did not dare to approach at all. They could only watch as the boy slowly disappeared at the end of the passage behind them under the escort of the clones. Damn it, we can't let him escape. One of the counselors realized the severity of the problem and couldn't help but grit his teeth and roar. Don't worry, we've already activated all our defense mechanisms. He won't be able to escape so easily. Right now, what we need to consider is whether we should send out a distress signal and mobilize a group of people to deal with the crisis. With the current manpower in the laboratory, I'm afraid it won't be easy to catch him. Another councilman also voiced his opinion. Just as the chancellor was frowning in deep thought, a violent tremor suddenly came from the ground, followed by a loud bang that reverberated in every corner of the huge underground laboratory. Boom! A huge force directly pushed the entire laboratory out from the ground, instantly causing dirt and dust to fill the air. Before some of the researchers could react, they suddenly realized that the gravity under their feet had suddenly increased by several times. As a result, during the process of falling, 70% of the unlucky fellows were smashed into meat pies or crushed to death by the heavy soil and rocks. No! Realizing what was going on, the president immediately screamed in despair. This was because he saw that the huge elemental creature that had been imprisoned underground had now returned to the side of its owner and creator. With the help of the innate strength of this huge creature, the boy easily broke through all the defense systems. Under the gaze of countless pairs of eyes, he calmly dug a big hole in the ground. Anyone who had witnessed the astonishing destructive power of the clay life with their own eyes would not choose to enter the hole and fight with it in a confined environment. This also meant that from this moment on, the Parliament had lost the chance to control or reverse the development of the situation. Staring at the huge hole in the ruins that led to the depths of the underground, one of the counselors took a deep breath, turned around, and advised the president, "Your Excellency, I think we should prepare for the worst." The worst? You mean, for some reason, the president's hands trembled slightly. It's war. The war within our civilization. It's obvious that the boy took away the weapon because he must have made some kind of secret deal with the shadow guards in private. Think about it. If the shadow guards really lose control and start a fight against the Parliament, what will the result be? The counselor hypothesized with a solemn expression. I understand now. According to the tradition of the Parliament, I authorize you to immediately call for an emergency meeting. At the same time, order all the armies and spellcaster groups on the mother planet to enter a state of first-degree combat readiness and be ready to launch a great purge at any time. The president was not a fool. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, he quickly got into his role. Although launching an internal purge was not what he wanted, in order to stop the entire civilization from rapidly falling into the abyss, he had to fulfill his duty. At the same time, the boy who was still in a sealed state and could not exert any strength at all had quietly sneaked into the Shadow Guard's headquarters on the mother planet. It was a newly built building that was filled with the solemn, deep, and dark aura of the theocracy era. However, before he could approach the office on the right side of the second floor, a familiar voice suddenly rang in his ears. "If I were you, I wouldn't disturb the leader at this time." It's you." The boy turned around, and after seeing the other person's appearance, a faint smile suddenly appeared on his face. "Of course it's me. Who else do you think it would be? Most importantly, have you gotten the thing we need?" The shadow guards slowly left the cover of the shadows, revealing their skin color and eyes that were different from the others. "Yes, I've got it. If you don't mind, I'd like to complete the deal as soon as possible." The boy did not try to hide anything. He generously took out the magical weapon and waved it in front of the other person's eyes, especially the pure shadow power inside. It was definitely not something that could be replicated by any forged textile.